Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 5 of What If Naruto Was in Code Geass. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. Euphemia waited outside the Britannian government building with two royal guards standing a short distance behind her. She had chosen to wear the same civilian outfit she had worn the first day she met Naruto, wanting this meeting to feel a little less formal if she could help it. Earlier that day, Cornelia had informed her about the arrangement she and Minato Namikaze had reached regarding the refrain patients and how Euphemia would be allowed to accompany Naruto to inspect the Britannian medical center that would be used to treat the Japanese victims affected by the drug. She was grateful for the trust being placed in her. More than that, if she were honest with herself, she was simply happy that she would get to see Naruto again. She had only been waiting a few minutes when one of the Namikaze Corporation's cars pulled up nearby. Naruto stepped out from the passenger side and smiled the moment he spotted her. Naruto, Euphemia said warmly as he approached. It's good to see you again. Her expression softened with concern. I heard what happened in Shinjuku. Are you and Suzaku all right? We're fine, Yuffie, Naruto assured her with an easy smile, and the relief that crossed her face made his own smile widen a little. And it's good to see you again too. Naruto opened the car door for her with a small, almost playful flourish. We should get going. It's not too far, but I don't want to keep the staff waiting. Ready? Yes, Euphemia replied, nodding once before stepping into the car. The ride through the Tokyo settlement was peaceful. For a while they simply watched the city pass by outside the windows, though it did not take long for Euphemia's curiosity to get the better of her. So, she began, turning slightly toward him, what exactly should I expect? Naruto leaned back in his seat, thinking for a moment before answering. It's a Britannian-run medical center, he said. Right now part of it is being set aside so Namikaze Corporation doctors and specialists can help treat the people affected by refrain. Cornelia approved it after reaching an agreement with my father. He glanced at her. The hospital staff are still getting things organized, but treatment has already started for the more serious cases. Euphemia nodded slowly. I'm glad, she said honestly. I was worried they might simply be imprisoned and forgotten. Naruto's expression dimmed slightly. That almost happened. The princess looked at him quietly, able to hear the weight in his voice. But Dad was able to work something out with Cornelia, Naruto continued. It's not perfect, but it's better than leaving them to rot. At least this way they'll get actual medical care. You and your family really do refuse to look away, don't you? Euphemia asked softly. Naruto scratched his cheek with a sheepish smile. I don't know if that's a good thing or a troublesome thing yet. For a moment Euphemia simply looked at him, and there was something unguarded in her gaze that made Naruto blink. Then she smiled. I think it's a very good thing. The faintest hint of pink rose in Naruto's cheeks, and he looked away toward the window for a second before giving a quiet laugh. The rest of the drive passed with lighter conversation. They spoke about school, about Millie's endless schemes, about Rivals's complaints, and about how Shirley was still trying to gather the courage to ask Lelouch out properly. Euphemia laughed more than once, and each time Naruto found himself thinking that maybe it was unfair for anyone to have a smile like that. When the car finally came to a stop, Naruto stepped out first and moved around to open Euphemia's door. He held out a hand to help her down, and when she placed her hand in his, something in both of them seemed to still for just a second longer than necessary. Naruto cleared his throat first. Ah, here we are. Euphemia stepped out of the car and looked up at the large white building in front of them. It was modern, clean, and unmistakably Britannian in design, with tall windows across the front and guarded entrances at either side. The grounds around it had been kept neat, with trimmed hedges and paved walkways leading to the main doors. It looked like exactly what it was, a respectable medical center serving the settlement. This is the place? Euphemia asked. Naruto nodded. Yeah. Part of the West Wing is being cleared out and converted for long-term treatment and observation. Cornelia's people chose the location themselves, so I figured it would make things easier if you saw it in person. As they walked toward the entrance, one of the guards inside recognized Euphemia and immediately straightened, opening the doors for them without question. The atmosphere inside was brighter and less severe than Euphemia had expected. Though it still clearly looked like a hospital, there was an effort being made to make the place feel calmer, less like a cold institution and more like somewhere people might actually heal. At the front desk, Naruto exchanged a few brief words with one of the receptionists before being handed a tablet. When he returned to Euphemia, he passed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, turning it on. "Information on the center," Naruto explained. "A basic layout, staffing assignments, the names of the doctors from Namikaze Corporation who are helping out, and the treatment plans currently being used for refrain withdrawal." He paused. "There's also a list of the patients transferred here, though anything overly private was left out." Euphemia scrolled through the files, her eyes widening slightly at how organized everything already was. "You prepared all of this for Cornelia?" Naruto nodded. "I figured she'd want more than just your word. This way she can review everything herself later." Yuffie looked up at him, clearly touched. "That was thoughtful." Naruto grinned a little. "I have my moments." She laughed softly, then continued scrolling through the files as they walked. The tour itself took the better part of the next hour. Naruto showed her the patient wards that had already been opened to the refrain victims, the nursing stations, the recovery rooms, the medication storage areas, and the offices where Namikaze Corporation's specialists were coordinating with the Britannian doctors. Yuffie quickly noticed that while the hospital itself was still under Britannian administration, the staff working with the refrain patients included both Britannians and Japanese, and to her relief, they appeared to be working together without hostility. Some of the patients were still in rough condition, withdrawn, silent, trembling, or muttering to themselves as the last traces of the drug wore off. Others were stable enough to rest quietly, though most still looked exhausted. The sight of them tightened Euphemia's chest. Naruto noticed. "We're still early in the process," he said softly. "Some of them are going to need a lot of time." Euphemia nodded. "But at least they have a chance now." Naruto smiled faintly. "Yeah, they do." As they continued through one of the quieter halls, Naruto suddenly slowed. "Hold on," he said. "I want to check on someone." Euphemia followed him as he approached a middle-aged female doctor exiting one of the patient rooms. The doctor had dark hair tied back neatly and glasses balanced low on her nose. The moment she recognized Naruto, she gave him a respectful nod. "Mr. Uzumaki." "Doctor," Naruto greeted. "How is she doing?" The woman glanced down at the chart in her hand before answering. "Stable," she said. "But still dealing with the aftereffects. There's not much more we can do right now besides keep her comfortable and monitor her response as the refrain fully leaves her system." Naruto let out a quiet breath. "I see. Thanks." After the doctor moved on, Euphemia glanced through the small window in the room's door and saw a woman sitting upright in bed, staring blankly at the opposite wall. She had long dark brown hair tied back and tired blue eyes, but there was something about her face that suggested she had once been very warm-looking. Euphemia turned to Naruto. "Who is she?" Naruto was quiet for a second before answering. "Akira Kazuki," he said. "She's important to a friend of mine." Euphemia looked back through the glass. "She was one of the refrain patients." Naruto nodded. "Yeah." There was enough care in his voice for Euphemia to understand that he was not going to say much more than that. So she did not press him. Instead, she simply stepped a little closer to him in the quiet hallway and said gently, "I'm glad she's here." Naruto looked at her, and for a second something softened in his expression. "Me too." They stood there for a brief moment in the stillness of the corridor, close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed. Euphemia became suddenly aware of just how near he was, and when she looked up at him, Naruto was already looking back down at her. Neither of them spoke. Then Naruto smiled, small and warm and a little shy in a way she was not used to seeing from him. "I'm glad you came, Yuffie." The words were simple, but the way he said them made her cheeks flush softly. "I'm glad you asked me too," she admitted. For a second longer they remained there, the silence between them feeling strangely gentle instead of awkward. Then footsteps sounded from farther down the hall, and the moment broke. Naruto cleared his throat lightly and stepped back just enough to keep walking. "There's still a little more to see," he said. And after that, his grin returned. "I'm making you ramen." Euphemia blinked. Ramen. Naruto stopped and turned to her fully, looking almost scandalized. You've never had ramen. Euphemia thought for a moment. I don't believe so. Not properly, anyway. Naruto stared at her in open disbelief. Then this has to be corrected immediately. That earned a bright laugh from her. He looked so earnestly horrified that she could not help it. Naruto pointed down the hallway dramatically. Come on. We finish the tour, then I make you the best ramen you've ever had. Yuffie tilted her head with a playful smile. That sounds unfairly easy, considering I've never had any before. Naruto put a hand over his chest in mock offense. Have a little faith. I do, Euphemia said, and then, more softly, especially in you. That caught him off guard enough that he actually looked away again, his face warming just slightly. Then, still smiling, the two of them continued on down the hall together, the sterile hospital lights unable to make the moment between them feel anything less than warm. Naruto was stretched out lazily on one of the couches in the Namikaze household living room, arms folded behind his head as he stared up at the ceiling. Across from him, Mito sat on another couch with the television remote in hand, flipping through channels in search of something worth watching. After a moment, Mito glanced over at him. You know Cornelia is probably going to dig through everything Euphemia brings back from that hospital visit, she said casually. She's not the type to just take someone at their word. I know, Naruto replied, not sounding worried in the slightest. Mito raised an eyebrow at that. Then why give her all that information in the first place? Naruto finally opened his eyes and sat up a little, resting one arm over the back of the couch as he looked at his sister. Because Cornelia was always going to investigate anyway, he said. The second she agreed to let Namikaze Corporation doctors work with the Britannian Medical Center, she was going to start checking backgrounds, schedules, staff movements, supply records, all of it. He shrugged. So giving Yuffie enough information to satisfy her was the safer move. Mito leaned back, still watching him. Naruto continued, all Cornelia's really going to find is a Britannian facility with Namikaze staff rotating through under approved terms. Everything important is compartmentalized, and the people Dad assigned to this know how to keep their mouths shut. A faint grin tugged at his mouth. So if she wants to waste time and resources chasing shadows, that's her problem. Mito huffed a quiet laugh. That's actually pretty sneaky. Naruto's grin widened a little as he let himself sink back into the couch. Just because I grew up here doesn't mean I can't still think like a shinobi, he said. Deception's a tool, same as anything else. Mito shook her head, amused. Of course you'd look at tricking a princess like it's no big deal. Naruto gave a lazy shrug. Well, I'm also trying to play it safe for Dad's sake, he added, his tone turning a little more serious. Public relations around the corporation have been a little strained since that extremist attack. A lot of people are already watching us closer than usual, and the last thing Dad needs right now is me giving Cornelia a reason to push harder than she already is. That made Mito pause. She lowered the remote a little and looked at him more closely. You're actually worried about that? Naruto let out a quiet breath. Yeah, Dad won't say it, but I know he's carrying a lot right now. The corporation took a hit after the attack, even if it wasn't enough to really hurt us. People are nervous, investors are asking questions, and the wrong kind of Britannians are getting louder. He looked toward the television without really seeing it. So if I can keep Cornelia busy without making things harder on him, then I will. For a moment, Mito just watched him. Then a small smile crossed her face. You really are more careful than people think. Naruto smirked and closed his eyes again. Don't spread that around. I've got a reputation to maintain. Mito laughed softly at that and went back to flipping through channels. Sure, she said. Wouldn't want anyone finding out the great Naruto Uzumaki actually uses his head. Naruto pointed at her without opening his eyes. You're one rude comment away from losing remote privileges. That only made Mito grin wider as she finally settled on something to watch, the quiet warmth of the house settling back in around them. Hours later, Euphemia stood in front of her sister's desk after handing Cornelia the report she had written on everything she had seen at the Britannian Medical Center, along with the tablet Naruto had given her at the start of the visit. The dark pink-haired viceroy was currently reading through the first part of the report while occasionally checking the tablet for herself. Yuffie stood quietly with her hands clasped in front of her, though her thoughts were anything but still. Every so often her mind drifted back to the afternoon she had spent with Naruto. The tour through the medical center. The way he had explained everything so earnestly. The ramen he insisted on making for her afterward. The small moments where it had felt less like official business and more like. A faint blush touched Euphemia's cheeks before she pushed the thought away as best she could. Cornelia, of course, noticed. How reliable is this information? The viceroy asked at last, not looking up from the tablet in her hand. Very reliable, Euphemia answered at once, regaining her composure. I checked the information while Naruto was showing me around. The staff lists, the treatment plans, the medical equipment, even the patient files that I was permitted to view, they were all accurate. Cornelia's gaze shifted from the tablet to her younger sister. And what is your overall impression of the place? Yuffie paused for a second before answering. It is peaceful, she said with a small smile. The doctors and nurses there are focused entirely on helping the patients recover. The atmosphere does not feel cold like some other hospitals. And no one seemed to be treated differently because they were Japanese. Cornelia leaned back slightly in her chair. That sounds idealistic. The smile on Euphemia's face dimmed. Cornelia continued in a calm, even voice. I am not saying that the treatment itself is false, Yuffie. From your report, the care being given does appear legitimate. She set the tablet down on her desk. But Naruto Namikaze still strikes me as naive. Yuffie's hands tightened slightly. Cornelia noticed, but pressed on anyway. He is trying to create a controlled space inside a reality that does not function the way he wants it to, the viceroy said. For a time, those patients may be treated with dignity and compassion. They may even begin to recover. But once they leave the medical center, they return to the same world as before. A world where nationality, status, and power still matter very much. The third princess lowered her eyes. Cornelia's tone softened only slightly. That is the problem with Naruto's way of thinking. He believes that because something should be better, it can be made better through will and kindness alone. But the real world does not bend so easily. Euphemia was quiet. Her sister watched her for a moment before continuing. What father said during Clovis' funeral was harsh, but not entirely untrue. Naruto and his father are naive. His intentions may be sincere, but sincerity is not enough to change the world. Cornelia's expression grew more serious. I do not object to you supporting his efforts to help those refrain victims. Nor do I object to the Namikaze Corporation assisting in rebuilding damaged Japanese districts if it keeps order stable. But do not place your faith in Naruto himself, Yuffie. In the end, I believe he will only disappoint you. For a moment, the room fell silent. Euphemia stood there, absorbing her sister's words. I see, she said quietly at last. She gave Cornelia a small bow. Thank you for your advice, sister. I will think on it. If there is nothing else, then I shall take my leave. Cornelia studied her younger sister carefully, faintly concerned by how subdued she sounded, but ultimately decided she had said what needed to be said. Yes, that is all. You may go. Euphemia bowed once more and quietly exited the office. Once outside, she began walking down the hallway without any clear destination in mind. Her thoughts were troubled. Am I wrong to trust Naruto? She wondered silently. She had only known him for a short time. And yet every time they met, she found herself believing more strongly that he truly wanted to help others, not for praise, not for status, but simply because he could not bear to leave them suffering. Her cheeks warmed faintly again as she remembered the afternoon. Naruto leading her through the hospital. Naruto growing scandalized that she had never really had proper ramen before. Naruto smiling at her not as a princess, or the sub-viceroy, but simply as Yuffie. It had almost felt like. Euphemia stopped walking for half a second and pressed her fingers lightly to her cheek. A little date, she murmured before blushing a bit harder and shaking her head at herself. Still, even with the warmth in her face, her thoughts soon turned serious once more. Maybe Cornelia is right, she admitted to herself. Maybe Naruto is too idealistic. Maybe he cannot truly change everything he wants to. She looked down for a moment, then slowly lifted her head again. But even if he is naive, does that make his goals wrong? The answer came to her almost immediately. She did not believe that. Even if Naruto failed, even if the world crushed some of what he was trying to build, that did not make his intentions foolish. It did not make compassion meaningless. Euphemia's expression steadied. I still want things to be different. I still want people to be treated as though they matter. And until Naruto proves otherwise, I will continue to believe in him. Her pace grew a little more certain as she walked on. Back in the office, Guilford entered after a brief knock and saluted. Your Highness. Cornelia looked up from the tablet. Guilford. The knight hesitated briefly before speaking again. I passed Princess Euphemia in the hall just now. She did not seem entirely herself. Is everything all right? Cornelia let out a quiet breath. She and I simply had a difference of opinion regarding Naruto Namikaze. I see. Cornelia picked up the tablet once more and held it out to him. This contains the staff information for the Namikaze Corporation personnel currently assisting at the Britannian Medical Center. Once Guilford took it, she continued. I want a thorough review done on every one of them. I want to know their medical credentials, their prior posts, and whether there is any evidence of resistance sympathies or unusual affiliations. At once, Your Highness. And another thing, Cornelia added. Increase oversight at the medical center, but discreetly. I will not have that arrangement turned into a political embarrassment, nor will I allow it to become cover for any subversive activity. Her violet eyes narrowed slightly. If Namikaze is sincere, then the scrutiny will not matter. If he is not, then I want to know sooner rather than later. Guilford nodded once. I understand. I will begin the investigation immediately. See that you do. With a bow, Guilford left to carry out her instructions. Cornelia remained seated behind her desk, the tablet resting in her hand as she looked over the information once more. Though she was still suspicious of Naruto Namikaze's larger motives and ideals, one thing had become clear to her. Whether through naivete or conviction, the young man had begun to make himself impossible to ignore. Inside the Black Knight's mobile command base, Zero sat alone in his private room while the original members talked among themselves downstairs. With his mask set aside for the moment, Lelouch studied a spread of reports detailing the Black Knight's recent operations, raids against drug traffickers, the exposure of corrupt officials, and small but meaningful victories that steadily built the organization's reputation. Each mission had ended in success. Each one had also served another purpose. The Kyoto Group, after sending the Black Knights the Gurren Mk2, had made it clear that they expected results worthy of further support. Zero, in turn, had placed the Crimson Nightmare in Colin's hands without hesitation, entrusting it to her much the same way he once had with the modified Glasgow. Since then, every operation had doubled as a live fire test, giving Colin the chance to grow more familiar with the Gurren's power, systems, and combat capabilities. And yet, despite all of that, Lelouch's mind kept returning to a different problem entirely. Madara. Lelouch leaned back in his chair, the report in his hands momentarily forgotten. Unlike before, Madara had not appeared during any of the Black Knight's recent operations. Not once. At first, Lelouch had expected the masked enigma to insert himself into their affairs as he had so many times before. Instead, the Black Knights had only received scattered reports that Madara was carrying out raids of his own throughout the Tokyo settlement. Some of the locations he had struck were places even the Black Knights had not known existed. Interesting, Lelouch murmured to himself. If Madara had his own network, his own objectives, and his own reasons for moving independently, then that only made him more dangerous. Lelouch set the file down on the desk and narrowed his eyes. So you finally stopped circling around us and started moving on your own, he thought. That only proves you're more resourceful than I gave you credit for. It also made him harder to predict. And unpredictability was dangerous. At present, only Colin, armed with the Gurren Mk2, stood any real chance of meeting Madara on equal footing in a direct confrontation. Even then, Lelouch could not say with certainty which of them would come out on top. Colin was his best pilot, the Gurren an extraordinary machine, but Madara remained an unknown factor wrapped in mysteries and impossible abilities. Worse still, Madara knew who he was. That thought sent a colder edge through Lelouch than any tactical concern. Madara knew that Lelouch Lamperouge and Zero were one and the same. With that knowledge, he had the power to shatter everything Lelouch had built. One word to the Britannian Empire, one revelation at the wrong time, and the entire foundation of his rebellion would collapse. And if that happened, Lelouch's hand tightened against the armrest of his chair. Nunnally, he inhaled slowly and forced his fingers to unclench. No, he muttered under his breath. Panicking solves nothing. He needed answers, and right now, the only person who might have them was CC. Lelouch was certain she was hiding something from him where Madara was concerned. He did not yet know what it was, only that the green-haired immortal knew more than she was willing to say. The problem, as always, was how to force it out of her. Geass did not work on her. Threatening himself again had worked once, but he doubted he could rely on that forever. CC would eventually stop believing the bluff, or worse, decide to call it. Still, if CC could be convinced that Madara posed a serious threat to him, then perhaps she might finally tell him what she knew. The question was how to do that without exposing just how much Madara already unsettled him. Zero. Got a second. Oji's voice from below pulled Lelouch from his thoughts. He slipped his mask back on and rose from his chair. I'll be right there, he called back, his voice once more transformed into Zero's altered tone. When he descended to the main floor, he found the others gathered near the central seating area. Ogi stood waiting with a file in hand, while the rest of the original members lingered nearby. Colin sat off to one side with the Gurren Mkii's manual open across her lap, reviewing its systems one more time despite already knowing most of them by heart. Lelouch noticed the dullness in her eyes, the strain she had been carrying since the incident involving her mother, but said nothing. What is it? Zero asked as he approached Ogi. The black-haired resistance leader handed him the file. We got some unusual intel from a Britannian who claims he wants to join the Black Knights. Zero took the file and flipped it open. What is this? He asked dryly. Another love letter. Ogi closed his eyes for a second, clearly regretting the joke he had once made that had given Zero ammunition forever. Tamaki burst out laughing from the sofa. Ha! And people say you don't have a sense of humor. You laugh too much, Colin muttered without looking up from the Gurren manual. Tamaki grinned, unbothered. Ogi pressed on. The information might be a trap. Even if it's real, contacting the source directly could be risky. He crossed his arms. But if this is accurate, we can't just ignore it either. Zero read the rest of the report in silence. A strange piece of intelligence. A movement in the Narita Mountains. A potential opportunity. Or a carefully laid snare. Either way, it had possibilities. And more importantly, it offered a chance to prove something. Not just to their enemies. But to the Kyoto group as well. They had sent the Gurren Mk2 as both support and test. Lelouch had no intention of letting that opportunity go to waste. At length, Zero closed the file. This weekend, he said, lifting his head, we're going hiking. A few of the members blinked. In the Narita Mountains. Recognition flickered across Oji's face immediately. I see, he said, nodding once. Beneath his mask, a faint smirk touched Lelouch's lips. It's about time we show Kyoto exactly what the Black Knights are capable of, he thought. And if this information is genuine, then Narita may become the place where we take our next great step forward. Very well, Ogi replied, accepting the decision without hesitation. Around them, the others stirred with renewed purpose. Colin closed the Gurren manual at last, her gaze sharpening for the first time in a while. Another mission. Another test. And perhaps, if fortune favored them, another victory to force the world to remember the name of the Black Knights. The weekend came far too fast, and Naruto found himself buried under a mountain of paperwork in his office at the Namikaze Corporation. Even with shadow clones helping sort, stamp, and file, the stacks on his desk seemed to multiply faster than he could get through them. Reconstruction reports from Shinjuku. Early planning documents for the Saitama project. Corporate sponsorship requests. Public relations briefings. Medical supply approvals for the Britannian Medical Center now treating refrain victims. Internal security reviews after the extremist attack. On top of all that, there were still final details for the concert the corporation was sponsoring and the arrangements for the upcoming school ball. Worst of all, most of it had landed on him because Minato and Kushina had decided that, as punishment for nearly getting himself killed during the extremist incident, Naruto would be taking on a much larger share of the company's day-to-day work. As Kushina had put it that morning, arms crossed and eyes narrowed dangerously, if you had enough free time to run off and throw yourself at armed extremists, then you have enough free time to learn exactly how much work your father handles in a day. Minato had been calmer about it. That had somehow made it worse. Naruto slumped lower in his chair and stared bleakly at the approval form in his hand. If this is what being a CEO is gonna be like, he muttered to himself, I may need to consider a career change. A knock at the door pulled him out of his misery. Come in, Naruto called, dismissing two shadow clones before the room started feeling even more crowded. The door opened, and Kaide walked in carrying another stack of files. Naruto stared at her. Then at the files. For one terrible moment, it honestly looked like he might cry. Kaide, as always, looked far too composed for someone delivering suffering. White coat over fitted business clothes, posture straight, expression calm, and just enough amusement in her eyes to make it clear she was enjoying this at least a little. Good afternoon, Naruto, she said pleasantly. You look overwhelmed. Naruto gestured weakly at the paperwork surrounding him. I think I'm being assassinated, he said. And the weapon of choice is paperwork. Kaide laughed softly and set the files down on the desk with suspicious care. You really did scare your parents this time, she said. Your father was very specific about not letting you dodge any of this. Naruto dropped his head against the back of his chair. Unbelievable. Betrayed by my own family. Kaide stepped around the desk. I think they just want to keep you alive. She stopped beside him, leaned in slightly, and straightened his collar before smoothing the front of his shirt with practiced fingers. There, she said. If you're going to drown in paperwork, you should at least look good doing it. Naruto blinked. A faint flush touched his face almost immediately, which only made Kaide's mouth curve a little more. Kaide. She looked at him innocently. What? That was flirting. No, she said smoothly. That was professionalism. Naruto gave her a flat look. I'm pretty sure professionalism isn't supposed to sound like that. Kaide tilted her head. It depends on the profession. Naruto opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, another voice cut in from the doorway. Seriously, Nei-chan, Reika said, looking scandalized. Lay off my man for 5 minutes. Naruto turned so fast he nearly knocked over a pen holder. I am not your man. Reika walked in with a folder tucked under one arm and looked completely unbothered by that. That sounds like a technicality. It is not a technicality. Kaide sighed as if she had expected exactly this. Reika. What? Reika asked, strolling farther into the office. I'm just saying, if you keep flirting with him while he's already trapped in here, it stops being fair competition. Naruto looked between the two of them and rubbed a hand over his face. I don't know what kind of nightmare this has turned into, but I want out. Kaide smiled faintly, then gave Reika a look. You're supposed to be helping, not making his life harder. Reika brightened. I am helping. I was emotionally supporting him. Naruto pointed at her. No. You were absolutely not. Kaide let out a quiet breath, then looked back at Naruto, her tone softening. Jokes aside, you really should take a break soon. You look tired. Naruto leaned back in the chair and gave her a tired stare. I am tired. That, Kaide said, is the most believable thing you've said all afternoon. She rested a hand lightly on the latest stack of papers. There are a lot of people leaning on you right now, Naruto. That's exactly why you can't burn yourself out. Naruto looked at her for a second, then exhaled. Yeah, I know. Kaide nodded once. Good. Then she turned to Reika. You. Out. Reika blinked. Me. Yes, you. But I just got here. And if you stay here any longer, you're going to keep antagonizing him until he forgets how to read. Kaide caught her younger sister by the wrist before she could protest further. Come on. Reika dug in her heels a little. Nei-chan, I'm working. You can work somewhere else. She looked back at Naruto over her shoulder. Try not to die under the paperwork, alright. Naruto gave her a tired little salute. No promises. Reika pointed at him as Kaide dragged her toward the door. Don't say things like that. It's very inconvenient for me emotionally. Naruto snorted. Kaide opened the door and pulled Reika with her. Come on before he remembers he outranks both of us. I'm being oppressed, Reika declared. You're being removed. The door shut behind them. The office finally went quiet. For a few seconds, Naruto just sat there in the silence, enjoying it. Then the Kyuubi's voice rolled through his head, thick with amusement. The older one is trouble. Naruto frowned at the nearest stack of papers. Both of them are trouble. You don't sound displeased. Naruto's eye twitched faintly. Shut up. A low, smug rumble of laughter answered him. Naruto reached for the top file Kaide had brought in. The moment he opened it, his expression changed. It was not paperwork. It was one of his reports. He read it once quickly, then again more slowly. The Britannian military was mobilizing around Narita. Troop movement. Nightmare deployment. Roadblocks. And buried deeper in the report was something else, more rumor than confirmed intelligence, but repeated often enough to be annoying. There was fresh chatter spreading through parts of the settlement, and even through some political circles, that Madara had been seen meeting privately with a princess. Naruto stared at that line for a second. Then groaned and dragged a hand down his face. Seriously. The Kyuubi perked up at once. What? Naruto read the line again, then let out a humorless little snort. Apparently Madara having a private meeting with a princess is becoming gossip now. The fox's laughter rolled through the link. How scandalous. The mysterious phantom of Area 11, secretly meeting royalty. Naruto dropped the report onto the desk. I hate people. No, the Kyuubi replied, thoroughly entertained. But rumors, yes. Naruto stood, the earlier humor fading as he refocused on the important part. Narita, he said quietly. Cornelia's moving. The fox's tone shifted with him. That will be a battlefield. Naruto nodded once. Yeah. If the Britannian military hit the Japan Liberation Front's position in Narita, people were going to die. A lot of them. And if the Black Knights were already preparing to move too. Naruto's jaw tightened. He looked around the office. Stacks of work. Punishment from his parents. Responsibilities he actually did need to take seriously now. All of it mattered. But Narita mattered too. The Kyuubi felt the choice settle in him before he even said it. You're going. Naruto reached for his jacket. I have too. And Minato. Kushina. Naruto grimaced. If they find out before I get back, I'm dead. An accurate assessment. Naruto let out a short, humorless laugh. Then his expression hardened again. I'm already pushing it after Shinjuku. So Kaide and Reika can't know. Nobody in the house can. Not until I'm gone. The fox went quiet for a beat, then gave a low approving hum. At least you are learning caution. Naruto pulled on his jacket. Don't sound proud. It's weird. I am not proud, the Kyuubi said dryly. I am relieved you are no longer 12. Naruto snorted under his breath and headed for the elevator. The plan came together quickly. He would take his motorcycle as far as he could, stop short of the roadblocks, and slip the rest of the way in on foot. Once he got close enough to Narita and out of sight, he could decide if the Izanagi needed to come out. As the elevator descended, Naruto's eyes hardened. The paperwork could wait. For a few hours, anyway. Narita could not. Princess Euphemia Lee Britannia let out a weary sigh as she stepped out of the shower and slipped into a robe, drying the last traces of water from her hair with a towel. It had been a long day, and tomorrow promised to be even longer. Cornelia was preparing for a major military operation, and though her sister wanted her to remain safely behind, Euphemia had no intention of simply sitting in the palace and waiting for news to be brought to her. She had not come to Area 11 to sit on a throne and do nothing. Why must Cornelia act like she's my mother? Euphemia thought, stepping out of the bathroom and pausing when a cool draft brushed against her skin. She frowned. The balcony doors were open. She was sure she had left them closed. Euphemia crossed the room quickly, shivering slightly as the night air rolled in, and reached for the handle. Good evening, Princess Euphemia. Yuffie gasped and spun around so quickly that her back hit the glass door. Standing in the middle of her room was a masked man cloaked in dark robes. His white and red mask hid his face completely, but even so, Euphemia recognized him at once. Madara. The same mysterious figure who had appeared during the hotel incident. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the masked man tilted his head slightly. I apologize for the intrusion, Madara said evenly. Though I thought it would be best to speak with you before it was too late. How did you get in here? Euphemia demanded, trying to steady her breathing and her racing heart both at once. The balcony, Madara replied simply, as though entering a princess's room in the middle of the night was the most natural thing in the world. Yuffie straightened, forcing herself to stand tall despite the fear prickling at the base of her spine. If you are here to capture me or kill me, then you won't escape this palace. If I intended either, princess, Madara said calmly, I would have done so at Lake Kawaguchi. That made her falter. He took a single measured step forward, not threatening, but impossible to ignore. I am here because there is something you need to know. Your sister's operation in Narita will not end cleanly. Yuffie's eyes narrowed. You know about Narita? Yes. And you're involved? She asked sharply. Are you working with Zero? No, Madara answered at once, his voice flat and certain. I am not allied with Zero. Our goals may appear aligned, but do not mistake me wanting to save lives as part of his justice. There was not even the slightest hesitation in the denial. Then why are you here? Because I believe he will strike at Cornelia, Madara said. If your sister moves against the Japan Liberation Front, Zero will see it as an opportunity. And if he acts, Narita will become chaos. Yuffie's breath caught. Then you came to warn me, about my sister. I came to warn you about the people who will suffer if nothing is done, Madara corrected. Cornelia is a soldier. She knows the risks of the battlefield. The civilians living in and around the city do not. Euphemia stared at him. For all his mystery, for all the danger that clung to him, there was no mockery in his tone. No cruelty. Only certainty. What are you saying? She asked quietly. I'm saying you should evacuate the city, Madara replied. As many people as you can. If you truly wish to save lives, do not wait for the battle to begin. Yuffie's hands tightened on the edge of her robe. Cornelia would never allow a full evacuation. She would think it would alert the JLF. She wouldn't, Madara said. Which is why I came to you instead. That stung with its truth. Euphemia looked away for a moment, thinking. If she acted too openly, Cornelia would stop her. If she did nothing, civilians could be trapped in the middle of a battle between the Britannian military, the JLF, and possibly Zero. And what about you? Yuffie asked, turning back to him. If Zero attacks and Cornelia is in danger, what will you do? Madara was silent for a brief moment. Then he answered. I will do everything in my power to protect the people in the city. Euphemia searched his masked face, wishing for some hint of the man beneath it. That isn't what I asked. It is the only answer I am willing to give. Yuffie frowned. You speak of protecting people, but you still wear a mask, still move in shadows, still appear wherever there is violence. Her voice softened, but only slightly. Why should I trust you? Madara regarded her quietly. You revealed yourself to armed terrorists to save strangers at Kawaguchi, he said. Why? The question caught her off guard. Euphemia began, then stopped. Because I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Madara gave the smallest inclination of his head. And neither can I. The answer settled over the room more heavily than any declaration could have. Yuffie lowered her gaze for a second, thinking through everything he had said. If I do this, she said at last, if I try to evacuate them, and Cornelia asks how I knew to do it. Tell her you feared the worst, Madara replied. Because in this case, that fear would be justified. Euphemia looked back up at him. You really believe Zero will come? Yes. And you still say you are not with him? I am not, Madara said again. Whatever Zero intends, it is his choice. Mine is to keep as many innocents alive as I can. Something in the way he said it made Euphemia believe him. Not completely. Not without questions. But enough. She drew in a breath and nodded once. Then I'll do what I can. Good. The room fell quiet again. Euphemia hesitated, then asked the question still pressing at her mind. Who are you, really? Madara turned slightly toward the balcony doors. Someone trying to prevent a tragedy. That is not an answer. It is the truth. Before she could press him further, a gust of wind swept through the room as the balcony door slid open again. Euphemia instinctively closed her eyes against the sudden chill. When she opened them, Madara was gone. The room was empty. Only the open balcony doors and the cold night air proved he had been there at all. Yuffie crossed the room slowly and shut the doors, then stood there with one hand still on the handle, her thoughts racing. Madara, Zero, Cornelia. What were they all moving toward? And why did it feel as though she was standing at the edge of something terrible? Later, as she lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, her mind kept returning not only to Madara's warning, but to the strange certainty in his voice when he said he would do everything in his power to protect the people in the city. And beneath that thought, another question lingered. Why does Zero feel so familiar? High in the Narita Mountains, inside a building that was only slightly better than a wooden shack, two JLF soldiers sat watch. Both had dark hair, though one wore his spiked upward while the others hung down in a messy fringe over tired eyes. The messier-haired soldier lowered a field phone back into its cradle and exhaled. Sector 5, nothing to report, he said, repeating his own message with a tired sort of boredom as he returned to the table in the middle of the room. Next check-in is in 2 hours. Across from him, the other soldier snorted as he leaned over the go board between them. Of course there's nothing to report, he said. This whole area is under Japan Liberation Front control. It's not like somebody can just stroll in up here. The words had barely left his mouth when the door slid open. Both men jolted upright, weapons instantly in hand. Standing in the doorway, calm as if he owned the place, was Zero. The spiky-haired soldier's eyes widened. Zero. Relax, Zero said evenly, stepping inside without a trace of urgency. He removed the outer mask, leaving the black cloth over the lower half of his face in place. I'm not here to fight. Neither soldier lowered his gun. Zero's visible eye flared to life. I want you to ignore anything unusual that happens during your watch. The command dropped into them like a stone into still water. Their expressions went blank for the briefest of moments. Then the change was immediate. Sure, no problem, the messy-haired soldier said casually, setting his weapon aside as if nothing at all had happened. Come on, the other one said, sitting back down at the table and reaching toward the go board. It's your turn. What's the rush? The first soldier muttered, reclaiming his seat as well. It's just another routine watch. At a different part of the mountain, a Barais IFF system flickered to life. I've confirmed the signal from Zero, the Black Knight pilot reported over the comms. We're moving to waypoint 2 now. Several members of the Black Knights, along with a number of beret and heavier equipment, continued their climb up the mountain paths under cover of darkness. A burst of static came over the radio before Tamaki's voice cut in. Hey, why doesn't Zero just use the radio in his beret? He asked, sounding more annoyed than curious. And what exactly do you think he meant by hiking? Inoue added dryly. Military training, Minami offered uncertainly. Yeah, except Zero's somewhere else, Tamaki pointed out skeptically. Maybe we're digging a hot spring, Kento said hopefully. Yoshida laughed. If that's why we hauled these excavators all the way up here, then I'm suddenly in favor of the plan. Tamaki snorted before switching targets. Colin, you heard anything about this? Inside the open cockpit of the Gurren, Colin was staring down at her cell phone, her thumb hovering over Naruto's number before she caught herself and slipped the device away. She looked up, forcing her attention back to the mission. I haven't, she answered simply. You, Ogi? Tamaki asked next. Ogi, seated in his own beret, hesitated just slightly before answering. No, not a word. There was something in his tone that made Colin glance in his direction, but before she could say anything, Tamaki was already grumbling again over the radio. This whole thing feels weird. It did. Ogi knew it more than anyone there. He had read the intelligence Zero had been given. He knew this operation was more than a simple reconnaissance run or some clever stunt meant to impress Kyoto. He also knew that if he said too much too soon, he might spread fear through the group before Zero was ready to act. For a brief moment, he tightened his grip on the controls. Things are about to get dangerous, he thought grimly. A lot more dangerous than most of them realize. Kento's voice came through the radio again, lighter than the mood called for. Well, weird or not, if Zero says move, we move. That drew a few murmurs of agreement from the others. Ogi let out a slow breath and steadied himself. He couldn't afford to let his unease show too much. Stay sharp, he said at last, his voice firmer now. Whatever Zero's planning, we'll need to be ready for it. That was enough for the others. No one pressed him further. The beret and support vehicles continued upward through the mountain, the night around them growing heavier as the Black Knights moved ever closer to the point where Zero intended to make his move. Within the shack, Zero sat reading a book, his mask removed and the black cloth beneath it lowered as well. Off to the side, the two JLF soldiers continued their game as if he were not even there, their Geass-bound minds completely ignoring his presence. As he waited for the operation to begin, Lelouch's thoughts drifted toward the two greatest obstacles before him, Cornelia and Madara. The day I've waited for has finally come, Cornelia, he thought, eyes lowering to the page without truly reading it. Once you're dealt with, that only leaves Madara. That name alone was enough to pull his thoughts in another direction. Earlier in the week he had once again considered how to force CC into telling him everything she knew about the masked enigma. Madara was too dangerous, too unpredictable, and worst of all, he knew far too much. As if summoned by the thought, Lelouch spotted the light green-haired immortal through one of the shack's windows, standing some distance away in her white jumpsuit bound with black straps as she looked out over the mountain. He closed his book, set it aside, and stepped out into the cold, carrying his mask beneath one arm. CC, what are you doing here? He asked, only just managing to keep the question from sounding like a demand. I said I would protect you, didn't I? CC replied evenly, turning her golden eyes toward him. Lelouch suppressed the urge to smirk. That was exactly the sort of answer he wanted from her. The more she positioned herself as his protector, the easier it would be to insist she tell him what she knew about Madara. You're overdoing it, Lelouch said, forcing mild irritation into his tone. CC ignored that completely. I've been wondering about something, Lelouch, she said, turning back toward the snow-covered mountains. Why are you still Lelouch? He frowned faintly. I don't have time for philosophy. Still, CC continued. You changed your family name to Lamperouge, yet you kept the name you were given at birth. Her voice was calm, almost distant. How sentimental. You really can't let go of the past. Lelouch nearly scowled. And CC swings to the opposite extreme, doesn't it? He replied, a hint of sharpness entering his tone. That's not even a human name. For just a moment, when CC looked at him, Lelouch was caught off guard by the sadness in her eyes. It was gone almost instantly, buried beneath that usual unreadable calm, but he had seen it. Lelouch, she said softly, the wind tugging at her long hair as snow moved around them, do you know why snow is white? He said nothing. It's white because it's forgotten what color it's supposed to be. A small, almost wistful smile touched her lips. Lelouch regarded her in silence for a moment, unreadable, before turning away and lifting his masks back into place. The others would be arriving soon enough. Then he stopped. CC, Zero said without looking back at her, if you truly intend to protect me, then start by answering my questions about Madara. You're that certain I know something? CC asked, amusement touching her voice now. I'm almost positive, Zero replied. Ever since Saitama, I've been sure that more happened between the two of you than you told me. If that is true, then I need to know everything. The power, abilities, and resources Madara commands are not something I can afford to underestimate. If you know anything, then it's in your best interest to tell me. CC hummed thoughtfully. Then, with her back still half turned to him, she asked, don't you find it curious, Madara's fascination with foxes? Zero's eyes narrowed slightly behind the mask. His mask, CC continued lightly. The imagery surrounding him. The way he seems to leave traces of foxes wherever he goes. It makes one wonder whether there are other foxes in his life as well, or people tied to them. Zero turned toward her fully, considering her words. If it came down to foxes, there was only one person who came to mind immediately. Naruto. The resemblance wasn't impossible to notice once the thought was planted: similar height, the same golden hair, access to unusual resources, and that constant association with foxes and fox-like imagery. No, Zero thought at once, almost irritated by the suggestion. That's absurd. Those are just coincidences. Unknown to him, Naruto's genjutsu quietly did its work, blunting the connection each time it came too close to fully forming. CC almost smiled. She could practically feel Lelouch's disbelief from where she stood. It made her wonder, briefly, whether he would even be capable of accepting the truth if she said it plainly. The genjutsu might turn even a direct answer into something his mind would reject. That thought amused her more than it probably should have. Still, if it ever came down to if Naruto truly became a danger to Lelouch and, by extension, to her own goal, then she would not hesitate to tell him everything she knew. For now, though, it was much more entertaining to let him chase the edges of the truth. Growing frustrated, Zero dismissed the implication as nothing more than another one of CC's games. I don't have time for this, he said coldly, turning away from her. Not tonight. And with that, Zero walked back toward the shack, leaving CC alone with the snow and the faintest trace of a knowing smile. Inside Cornelia's personal transport carrier, the second princess of Britannia stood beside the tactical display table while Euphemia watched the projected map of the Narita Mountains with quiet intensity. Guilford stood faithfully at Cornelia's side, while Darlton and several officers focused on the details of the operation. We are certain the Japan Liberation Front headquarters are somewhere within this region, Darlton began, gesturing to the wireframe terrain map spread across the table. 4 battalions have already been divided into 7 separate units and concealed around the surrounding area. Once the Viceroy gives the signal, the encirclement will close all at once. We will trap the enemy and eliminate them before they can regroup. He turned toward Cornelia at the end of his explanation, awaiting any correction. Euphemia kept her eyes on the map. Last night's warning echoed in her mind. Evacuate the city. If you truly wish to save lives, do not wait for the battle to begin. She had done what she could without openly challenging Cornelia's authority, pressuring the local administration and relief offices to begin moving civilians out under the justification of medical and supply precautions. It had not been a full evacuation, not nearly as complete as she would have liked, but enough that more people would be out of harm's way than otherwise. At least, she hoped so. Naruto, did I do the right thing? She asked silently in her thoughts. I wanted to save them. I just hope it was enough. Her gaze shifted over the projected map again. And are you certain the enemy won't slip outside the encirclement line? Euphemia asked, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Cornelia glanced toward her younger sister. You're referring to Zero. Euphi hesitated for only a second. Yes. Him, and any others who might interfere. Cornelia's expression sharpened faintly, but Darlton answered first. You needn't worry, Princess Euphemia. At the start of the operation, all major highways and mountain routes in the area will also be blocked off. Even if Zero appears, there will be nowhere for him to move that we do not already control. And if he is foolish enough to show himself, Cornelia added coolly, then this will be the end of him. Euphemia said nothing to that. She thought again of the masked man standing in her room the night before. Of the certainty in his voice when he spoke of chaos. Of his belief that civilians would suffer if nothing was done. And still, she had no proof. Only instinct, and the unsettling feeling that he had not come merely to frighten her. Some time later, Cornelia waited inside her personal modified Gloucester while the final units moved into place. All units are in position, one of the officers reported over the comm. Understood, Cornelia replied. Euphemia will remain with G1 and provide logistical support as planned. Assign her to oversee the medical group and relief coordination. Yes, Your Highness. The line clicked off. Almost immediately another voice replaced it. Princess Cornelia. Cornelia smirked faintly. Guilford. Let me guess. This is about Euphi. Yes, Guilford admitted. With respect, Your Highness, the sub-viceroy should not be this close to an active battlefield. Cornelia's smirk softened into something almost fond. She has been unusually stubborn about this. Yuffie insists that if she is to govern Area 11, then she cannot remain forever blind to the cost of military action. Inside the transport carrier, Euphemia noticed a unit icon positioned farther back from the main operation. What is that unit doing there? She asked, indicating the symbol. One of the officers checked the display before answering. That is our reserve force, Princess. It includes the Lancelot. Euphemia blinked. Suzaku's unit. Yes, another officer replied, his tone neutral but carrying the slightest edge of old prejudice. As a rule, numbers are not permitted to operate nightmares, but that unit is a special exception. The second prince personally supports that project, the first officer added. We are to provide them with as many opportunities for actual combat as possible. Euphemia looked down at the symbol marking the Lancelot's position. Suzaku was here. That gave her a little comfort, though it also made her worry. If battle truly broke out the way Madara had implied, then Suzaku would be thrown straight into it. She lowered her gaze again, hiding her concern behind the calm expression expected of a princess. Please let this end with as few deaths as possible, she thought. And if I was right to have those people moved, then let it matter. On top of the mountain, Zero had regrouped with the rest of the Black Knights. At the moment, they stood watching the 3 excavators they had brought with them as the machines bit into the mountainside and hurled dirt and stone out behind them in heavy sprays. The engines roared through the cold air, and the earth itself seemed to tremble under the force of what Zero had set into motion. Ogi stood beside Zero, his eyes fixed on the ongoing excavation. Are you really going through with this? He asked at last, unable to keep the uncertainty out of his voice. Zero did not look at him. Our opponent is Cornelia, he replied calmly, his gaze remaining on the excavators. Her forces are among the best Britannia has to offer. If we meet them head-on, we lose. So the battlefield itself must become our weapon. Ogi frowned, glancing away for a moment before speaking again. Then why not cooperate with the Japan Liberation Front directly? He asked. If they knew what you were planning, things might go more smoothly. He hesitated, then added more quietly, I think everyone would feel a little more at ease if Madara were here too. Zero's expression darkened behind the mask. What was that? He asked, though it was clear he had heard perfectly well. Ogi stiffened slightly. Zero finally turned his head just enough to regard him. Ogi, he said, his voice taking on a wounded edge that sounded almost sincere, don't you believe in me anymore? What? Ogi said, blinking in surprise. Of course I do. I'm the one who asked you to lead us, remember? Zero held his gaze for a moment longer before looking back toward the machines. Then there's only one answer you need to give, he said evenly. Ogi let out a slow breath. He still didn't fully understand everything Zero had planned. He still didn't like going into an operation with this much uncertainty. And part of him really did wish Madara had shown up, if only because the masked enigma had a way of making impossible situations feel survivable. But in the end, he had chosen this. He had chosen Zero. Right, Ogi said, a bit reluctantly, but with conviction all the same. Beside them, the excavators continued tearing into the mountain, and the Black Knights waited for the moment when Zero's plan would turn Narita itself into a battlefield Britannia would never forget. Inside her cockpit, Cornelia received the signal she had been waiting for. Viceroy, Darlton's voice came over the comm, steady and disciplined. It is time. Cornelia's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening with cold resolve. Understood, she replied. Her fingers tightened over the controls for only a brief moment before she gave the order. Commence the operation. At once, her nightmare launched forward, and across the Narita Mountains Britannian forces began to close in from every side, converging on the Japan Liberation Front's hidden base and sealing the encirclement exactly as planned. Cornelia watched the tactical data update in real time, every unit moving into place with ruthless precision. You of the Japan Liberation Front, she said coldly, her voice low inside the cockpit, you who have been left behind by time itself, you who abandoned even the most basic decency in your desperate clinging to a dead age. Her eyes sharpened with contempt. Your dream of a lost golden era ends here. The Gloucester surged ahead. You will fall, Cornelia declared, and be swept into nothing. Naruto sped toward the Narita Mountains on his motorcycle, the engine growling beneath him as the night air rushed past. Just as he had expected, the Britannian military had already begun locking the area down. Barricades and roadblocks had been set up along the highway, forcing him to weave off the main route more than once to avoid being spotted. A moment later, the QB's voice came through their mental link, carrying an unusual edge of urgency. Naruto, the attack has started. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Already? Yes, the QB answered, sounding more focused than mocking for once. I can feel the surge of fear, anger, and killing intent coming from the direction of Narita. The battle has begun. You need to move faster. Naruto was silent for half a second before a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Wow, he thought back, you're being downright helpful. I didn't know I was rubbing off on you. The QB let out a low, irritated huff through the link. Do not get used to it. I simply have no desire to watch you arrive too late and complain about it for the next week. Naruto snorted softly. Sure. Keep telling yourself that. He veered off the highway at the next opening and brought the motorcycle to a stop in a secluded patch of land hidden from the road. In one smooth motion he hopped off, pressed a hand to the bike, and sealed it away. He was close enough now to make the rest of the journey on foot. The main reason he had taken the motorcycle for most of the trip was simple. While a shinobi could outrun most vehicles over rough ground, a direct road was still faster for covering long distances without wasting chakra. Now, though, stealth mattered more than speed on the open highway. Naruto straightened, reached for his mask and cloak, and pulled on his Madara disguise. Then, without another word, he shot forward toward the distant mountain like a blur, racing into the night as the sounds of war waited ahead. It's begun, Zero said as the Britannian Sutherlands poured into position below, the scale of the encirclement becoming clear to everyone gathered on the mountainside. A ripple of fear passed through the Black Knights. Even the newer members who had been trying to act brave now stared openly at the enemy forces closing in from every direction. These were not random Britannian patrols. These were Cornelia's troops. Huh. What the hell is this? Tamaki shouted, whirling around to face Zero. You've got to be kidding me. They've got the whole area surrounded. He pointed frantically toward the mountain paths and ridgelines. There's no way out. We've already been cut off, Zero replied, calm and almost detached. Our only chance of survival now is to fight. What? Inoue said, unable to keep the fear out of her voice. We can't fight the Britannian military head-on. Let me get this straight, Tamaki snapped, gripping the strap of his rifle so tightly his knuckles turned white. We're surrounded, and your brilliant plan is to take on Cornelia's forces directly. Kento looked up at Zero, his expression tight with unease. These aren't normal troops. Cornelia's army is stronger than anything we've faced before. Correct, Zero said. If we win here, it will be nothing short of a miracle. A heavy silence followed that answer. Ogi stepped forward, unable to hold back any longer. Zero, what exactly are you saying? There was frustration in his voice now, and no small amount of disbelief. He had trusted Zero because he believed the masked man always had a plan. But right now, it sounded as if that plan had been to lead all of them into a slaughter. Zero turned his masked face toward him. Even messiahs must perform miracles if they are to be acknowledged, he said. So then, we will simply have to create our own miracle, won't we? The words did not reassure anyone. Now hang on just a damn minute. Tamaki shouted, anger finally boiling over his fear. This isn't some game. The price for your miracle is our lives. He yanked his rifle off his shoulder. I knew it was insane to make you our leader. It should have been me. In a single smooth motion, Zero drew his pistol and pointed it straight at Tamaki. The entire mountainside seemed to go still. For one long, tense moment, no one moved. More than a few of the Black Knights were certain Zero was about to shoot Tamaki where he stood. Instead, Zero slowly reversed his grip on the gun and held it out. Our path of retreat has been severed, he said, his voice carrying coldly through the silence. If you truly believe you can lead better than I can, then shoot me. No one moved. Tamaki stared at the weapon, but did not reach for it. Zero's gaze swept across every member of the Black Knights. Anyone, he said. Take it. Challenge me. If you believe you can win without me, then kill me now and lead this battle yourselves. Still no one stepped forward. The wind moved through the mountain pass, but among the gathered rebels there was only silence, broken by tense breathing and the distant rumble of Britannian engines. Since you joined the Black Knights, Zero continued, his voice rising, you were left with only two choices. He lowered the gun slightly, but not enough to lessen the weight of his words. You may either live with me, or you may perish with me. He let the challenge hang there. No one answered. Tamaki scowled fiercely, glaring at the gun, at Zero, at the mountain itself, at everything except the decision in front of him. Then at last he let out a sharp, frustrated breath and looked away. Fine, he muttered. Do whatever the hell you want. Kento bowed his head slightly. We acknowledge you as our leader, Zero. One by one, the others lowered their eyes or gave silent signs of assent. Ogi said nothing, but the look in his eyes made it clear that he understood what Zero had just done. This was no longer mere loyalty born from admiration or necessity. If they followed him now, in the face of certain death, then they were truly his. Beneath his mask, a faint smirk touched Zero's lips. Thank you, he said. I appreciate your faith. Then he turned back toward the battlefield below, as though the matter had already been settled from the moment he first spoke. Now, Zero said, his voice sharpening into command, let us show Britannia a miracle. Inside a mountain lodge hidden deep within the Narita Range, one of the Japan Liberation Front's main command posts had erupted into controlled chaos. Soldiers rushed between radios and monitors while officers barked for updated positions. At the center of it all, General Kate stood rigidly before a large computer display that showed enemy icons steadily closing around the mountain from every direction. We're under attack. The aging general asked sharply, his weathered face hardening. His short gray hair and lined features gave him the look of a man who had already survived too many battles. Yes, sir, one of the soldiers answered at once, snapping into a salute. Britannian forces have fully encircled the Narita Mountains. We've counted over 100 units so far, and more may still be moving into position. Another soldier, unable to hide his panic, stepped forward. Our underground reserve forces were seized before they could mobilize. They must have known exactly where to hit. We're surrounded, General. A third soldier turned from one of the communications terminals, visibly shaken. General Kate, we've received a message from Cornelia's forces. They're demanding our immediate surrender. Catus's expression twisted with contempt. Idiots, he growled. If we surrender here, then we lose everything. The Japan Liberation Front falls, and with it the backbone of the resistance. The first soldier swallowed, then forced himself to ask the question weighing on everyone's mind. Then what are your orders, sir? Do we engage the enemy directly, or do we fortify our position and hold out? Catus's eyes moved across the display, searching, calculating, already knowing how bad their position truly was. What about Toto? He asked. Where is he? At the mention of the famed commander, several of the soldiers looked a little less hopeless. Toto had pulled off miracles before. If anyone could break Britannia's noose, it was him. He left for Kyoto, sir, one of the men answered. He went to receive the custom beret. The 4 holy swords are with him as well. The soldier hesitated before forcing out the rest. If they kept to schedule, they should be on their way back now, but they won't make it in time. For a long moment, Kate said nothing. Then his jaw tightened. Prepare the beret for deployment, he ordered. We break the encirclement at one point and force an escape route. A few of the soldiers looked startled, but none dared object. Kate straightened, his old soldier's pride flaring in his eyes. We'll show Britannia that Japan's spirit hasn't died, he said, his voice rising with fierce resolve. If this is our moment of truth, then we meet it head-on. Around him, the fear in the room did not vanish, but it began to harden into determination. Darlton advanced up the mountain at the head of his unit, his personal Gloucester moving with steady purpose over the uneven terrain. Around him, the other Britannian nightmares followed in disciplined formation, weapons ready as they pushed deeper into the Narita Mountains. The main enemy force should be showing itself any moment now, Darlton said calmly over the comms. Switch to ECCM mode. Link up on channel Alpha 4. Yes, my lord, came the immediate replies. Darlton's eyes remained on the slopes ahead of him. And the enemy machines, what are they called again? Beret, sir, one of his subordinates answered. Right, Darlton said, a faint smirk touching his lips. Something like a Glasgow built by amateurs. Don't underestimate them just because they're crude. At another point along the battlefield, Cornelia watched as 3 Beret burst from concealed positions in the mountain. How clever, the Viceroy of Area 11 murmured, mildly impressed. They've turned the mountain itself into a fortress. Over the speaker, Guilford's voice came at once. Your Highness, please fall back. Cornelia almost sounded bored. Guilford, do stop treating me like one of your women. Without another word, she drove her Gloucester forward. Princess Cornelia. Guilford shouted, forced to follow after her. Inside one of the enemy Beret, a JLF pilot spotted her immediately. It's Cornelia. Don't lose your nerve. Another pilot barked. Concentrate your fire on the lead unit. The Beret opened fire together, unleashing a barrage meant to overwhelm her before she could close the distance. Cornelia's Gloucester cut through the gunfire with effortless precision, not a single round coming close enough to strike. Her machine surged forward with terrifying speed as she extended the prongs of her lance. Insolent vermin. With one strike, she swept 2 Beret off their feet. Before the third could recover, Cornelia drove her lance straight through its cockpit. The machine went dead instantly. Behind her, Guilford's Gloucester moved in support. One of his Harkins tore through a cannon emplacement that had been lining up a shot on Cornelia. Very well, he muttered. Then I'll cover you from behind. Cornelia barely slowed. Well, I am Cornelia Lee Britannia. She declared across the battlefield, her voice carrying through the open channel like a challenge. Is there no one here who will stand before me? As if answering her, more Beret began emerging from concealed hangars and reinforced openings in the mountainside. Some engaged her forces from a distance while others rushed directly toward her. It made no difference. Cornelia cut through them one after another. Her superior machine, combined with her overwhelming skill as a pilot, made the fight horribly one-sided. Beret fell to her lance from every angle, pierced through the torso, thrown from the slopes, or torn apart before they could even coordinate an attack. They're too fragile, Cornelia muttered in disgust after driving her lance down through another Beret from above. Elsewhere on the mountain, Darlton's unit was facing heavier resistance. The JLF pilots there fought desperately, throwing everything they had into slowing the Britannian advance. The enemy is concentrating their defense in this sector, Darlton observed, firing his heavy rifle and blasting one of the Beret apart. This may be the key point. Split up and search the area. His Gloucester moved behind a line of large boulders, and his men followed suit, spreading out while exchanging fire with the enemy and probing for anything hidden behind the visible defenses. The search did not take long to bear fruit. After pushing through scattered resistance and destroying every Beret that stood in their path, one of Darlton's men finally spotted it, a remote lodge built into the mountainside in just the sort of place meant to be overlooked. General Darlton, one of the pilots reported. Based on the pattern of enemy movement, I believe that lodge is the entrance to the JLF's main base. Darlton stared at it through the monitor inside his cockpit. I believe, he said with satisfaction, the proper term here is, bingo. A flare shot into the sky, signaling the discovery to the rest of the Britannian forces. In the distance, Cornelia saw the flare rise. Darlton, she said quietly. Guilford followed her gaze. So that's where their base is. Cornelia brought her Gloucester to a halt. We'll hold position here. Guilford glanced at her. Are you certain? Cornelia's answer came sharp and cold. I have no need to steal accomplishments from my subordinates. Then her tone eased, though only slightly. Send the reserve forces to reinforce Darlton's position. It seems he is about to earn himself another medal. A faint smirk touched her lips. Up ahead, Darlton and his forces began closing in on the lodge. Any resistance still clinging to life in Area 11, Darlton began over the comm, his voice full of certainty as he advanced. Will soon be wiped away, Cornelia finished quietly from afar, as though answering him across the battlefield. Impressive as always, Cornelia. A perfectly logical deployment. Zero thought from within his personal burai. Unlike the standard units the Kyoto group had provided, his machine stood apart because of its gold-crested headpiece shaped like the horns of a samurai kabuto. Excellent, and because it is so logical, easy to read. Just like your position. He pulled off his mask and lowered the black cloth over the lower half of his face before activating the burai's external speakers. All preparations are complete, Zero announced. Black Knights, prepare to move out. Around him, the gathered members of the Black Knights reacted in different ways. Some tightened their grip on their rifles. Others swallowed their fear and climbed into their beret. No one could mistake what was waiting for them below, Cornelia's army, poised to crush them. Damn it, we've got no choice now, one Black Knight muttered, forcing himself forward. I don't want to die, another admitted, voice trembling despite his attempt to sound brave. We'll make the miracle happen, a third said more fiercely, trying to steady the others as much as himself. Yeah, one of the newer recruits said, we've got Zero with us. Zero's gaze swept over them all before he continued. We, the Black Knights, will descend from the summit and strike the Britannians by surprise. Per my instructions, all units will charge toward Point 3 en masse. His voice was calm, absolute. The purpose of this operation is the capture of Cornelia Lee Britannia, second princess of the Empire. Then he turned his focus to the Crimson machine waiting nearby. Our breakthrough route will be opened by the Gurren Mk2. His voice sharpened. Colin, use penetrating electro number 3. End this with one blow. Inside the Gurren's cockpit, Colin's blue eyes narrowed. Got it. Her right hand moved over the controls. The Gurren's systems answered instantly. Output confirmed. Radiant wave surger level is ready and holding. She exhaled once, closed her eyes briefly, then snapped them open again. Activating gauntlet now. Black lightning, edged in crimson, burst across the Gurren's right arm and surged downward into the electrode Zero had designated. The energy ripped through the earth and into an underground water source hidden deep within the mountain. For a moment, nothing. The Black Knights held their breath. Some of them began to doubt. Then the mountain trembled. A rumble shook the summit. The earth split with a violent crack, and the mountainside gave way all at once. It worked. Colin shouted, excitement and disbelief mixing in her voice. A roaring wall of water, stone, and shattered earth thundered down the mountain. The landslide tore through everything in its path. JLF and Britannian alike were swallowed if they were too slow or too unlucky. Entire units vanished beneath the flood of mud and stone. The sudden disaster threw the battlefield into chaos, severing formations and isolating survivors. Most importantly, it cut off Cornelia from a large portion of her own forces. Inside her Gloucester, Cornelia watched the torrent rage across the battlefield with cold fury. Status report, she demanded. We're trying to confirm casualties and positions now, one of her subordinates answered over the comm, voice tense. Your Highness, fall back. Guilford urged. Your position is no longer secure. I don't care about my position, Cornelia snapped. Find Darlton. And where is Alex? Far below, on the edge of the city near Narita, Naruto saw the landslide coming. His eyes widened. Damn it. The wave of water and debris was heading straight for the city, and it was moving too fast for a normal evacuation to matter now. He launched himself into the air with a chakra-enhanced leap, the red crystal on his wrist flaring as he summoned the Izanagi in a burst of crimson light. The nightmare frame hit the ground in a heavy metallic impact, and Naruto was already inside the cockpit before it had fully settled. Unlike the false rumors that followed him, the Izanagi was no beast-shaped machine. It stood in its full combat frame from the start, a crimson humanoid nightmare built for speed and power, its silhouette sharp and predatory without ever losing the shape of a warrior. The QB's voice came through their mental link, more focused than mocking now. What are you planning? Naruto's Sharingan flared to life as the Izanagi moved to place itself between the city and the oncoming landslide. Just watch. The Tomo in his eyes spun faster and faster until his Mangekyo Sharingan bloomed into existence. Blood began to trickle from his left eye as he channeled chakra into the Izanagi. Amaterasu. Inside the cockpit, Naruto directed the chakra into the seal embedded in the Izanagi's left eye unit. Outside, the nightmare's left eye darkened to pitch black. Then the flames appeared. A wall of black fire erupted in front of the Izanagi, spreading outward as far as Naruto's sight and control could carry it. An instant later the landslide crashed into the curtain of Amaterasu and stopped. Water hissed into steam. Rock split and blackened. Mud and shattered earth burned away as if consumed by judgment itself. The city shuddered behind the Izanagi, but the center line Naruto had chosen was held. Since when could the Izanagi do that? The QB asked, openly impressed. Naruto wiped the blood from beneath his eye, his breath unsteady but controlled. I sealed Amaterasu into the Izanagi's left eye based on a containment principle I adapted, he answered through the link. As long as I feed it chakra, I can release, direct, and reabsorb the flames through the seal. When it's active, the eye turns black. When it's not, it returns to normal. If I can't fully recover the flames, the unit goes blind until I restore the seal. The QB gave a gruff noise through their link. You're getting much better with those cursed eyes. Naruto snorted faintly despite the strain. What? I'm rubbing off on you now. You're actually being helpful. Do not ruin the moment. When the landslide finally lost its force, Naruto dispersed enough of the Amaterasu for the Izanagi to advance. He looked left and right. He had managed to save the center of the city. But the outer sections had still been struck. There had been no way to cast the flames farther without risking the whole wall arriving too late. His jaw tightened. That was still impressive, the QB said quietly. Most would not have saved any of it. Naruto did not answer right away. His gaze had already shifted back toward the mountain, where he could still see the signs of battle. Now for the hard part, he muttered. The Izanagi moved forward, its metal feet striking through water, stone, and wreckage as Naruto poured chakra into it and drove it up toward Narita. Let's put an end to this, he said, voice hardening. And with that, the Izanagi surged toward the battlefield and toward Zero. From the summit of the mountain, Zero watched the results of his plan unfold through the monitors inside his personal barai. For a brief moment, even Lelouch had to admire it. More destructive than I anticipated, he thought as he observed the flood of earth, stone, and water tearing its way down the mountainside. We succeeded in isolating Cornelia's unit, but the spread was wider than expected. Perhaps I should have asked a physics teacher for help. Or Nina to lecture me on probability. The joke faded the instant something else caught his eye near the foot of the mountain. A line of black. No flames. Black flames. Lelouch leaned forward. What? The fire had appeared in a solid wall between the city and the landslide, devouring rock and water alike until the center of the city was spared the full force of the disaster. His eyes narrowed. Black flames, he murmured. A new Britannian weapon. Or, his jaw tightened. Madara. That possibility interested him far more. If Madara had intervened, then it meant he had come to Narita after all. And if he was here, then the battlefield had just become far more complicated. Still, Lelouch forced himself back to the matter at hand. Cornelia has only limited reinforcements heading her way, Zero said into the calm. Break through them. At once, the Black Knights began their descent from the summit, their beret and supporting units pouring down the slope to engage the disordered Britannian lines. Far below, a soldier's voice came over Cornelia's communications. New enemy force confirmed descending from the summit. Carius unit is moving to intercept. Cornelia's eyes narrowed inside her Gloucester. So, she murmured, they mean to take advantage of the confusion. Another transmission came in almost immediately. Emergency call from Carius unit. What is it? Cornelia demanded. The answer came with urgency and confusion. It isn't the Japan Liberation Front. They identify the enemy as the Black Knights. Cornelia's eyes sharpened. Then it's Zero. Jeremiah Gottwald's voice roared over the battlefield channels from the rearguard position. Ever since the humiliation of the Shinjuku incident, ever since Zero and Madara had first appeared and shattered his standing, Jeremiah had lived for one thing: vengeance. On Zero most of all. How dare he show his face here? Jeremiah shouted, driving his Sutherland forward. Zero. Lord Jeremiah. Valletta called after him from behind. You cannot simply abandon your position. Jeremiah didn't even look back. This demands decisive action. If you want glory, then follow me. His Sutherland surged ahead with reckless speed. On his monitor, fresh tactical data blinked into existence. Enemy resistance had already cut through Carius formation. They wiped out Carius unit. Jeremiah said, astonishment turning quickly to excitement. Then if I destroy Zero before he reaches Princess Cornelia, my honor is restored. Lord Jeremiah, Valletta's voice came again over the radio, closer now. He glanced back long enough to see her and the other fallen purebloods following him. Valletta. I knew you would come. The disgraced purebloods advanced straight toward the force escorting Zero. Inside his barai, Lelouch watched their approach and almost smiled. Burn the bridges behind you and keep your back to the wall, he thought. The classics remain classics for a reason. Since their descent had begun, the Black Knights had been tearing through the nearest Britannian units with a mixture of barai attacks and anti-nightmare artillery, using the landslide's aftermath as cover and confusion. Then Jeremiah appeared. Zero. Jeremiah bellowed as he opened fire, his Sutherland's rifle destroying 2 of the 5 beret moving with Lelouch. Face me. Come out and fight, Jeremiah gobbled. Well, Zero replied, his voice almost amused. It's been some time, Jeremiah. And you're still in the army, I see. His tone hardened into mockery. I would stay and catch up, but I'm terribly busy at the moment, Orange Boy. Jeremiah's fury exploded at once. Orange. He roared. Die. He charged forward recklessly, only for the Gurren Mk2 to appear in a crimson blur directly in his path. The Japanese nightmare knocked Jeremiah's rifle aside with its knife, forcing his Sutherland backward and making him deploy both arm blades just to keep from being overwhelmed. Lord Jeremiah. Valletta shouted, alarmed by the unknown frame's performance. Stay back. He snapped. This is my duel. But look at that machine, Valletta insisted, even as she kept her own nightmare ready. I've never seen anything like it before. Do you think the 11s actually built that? Jeremiah scoffed and drove his Sutherland at the Gurren. You think 11s are capable of this? The Gurren blocked his first strike with its right arm, evaded the next, then sliced through one of the Sutherland's arm blades with contemptuous ease. A second later it vanished from in front of him and reappeared high above. Jeremiah's eyes widened. It's fast. For just an instant, something like fear touched his voice. He had only seen that level of speed twice before, once from Madara, and once from the Lancelot. Is this what destroyed Carius unit? Inside the Gurren's cockpit, Colin's eyes were bright and fierce. That's right, Britannia, she said. We can finally fight you head on. And our counterattack begins with this. Her voice sharpened with pride. The Gurren Mk2. She thrust the Gurren's right hand toward Jeremiah's Sutherland. Jeremiah jerked back. There's something in the right hand, keep your distance. He didn't get the chance. The Gurren's right arm extended with terrifying speed and seized the Sutherland by the head. What? Sorry, Colin muttered, though there was little softness in it. She knew exactly what the next second might do to the pilot inside. She pressed the control. The Gurren's radiant wave surger activated. Red-black energy erupted through the Sutherland from the point of contact, turning its armor molten and unstable in seconds. The violent energy spread through the machine and into the cockpit, overloading every system. What is this? Jeremiah screamed as the displays in his cockpit shattered into static. Blood began to run from his nose. Lord Jeremiah, eject. Valletta shouted, her own monitor already distorting under the energy discharge. I will not run. Jeremiah snarled. Zero is right there. He stretched his Sutherland's arm toward Zero's barai even as the metal fingers exploded apart. Then something burst across his screen. The auto-eject. No. Don't you dare activate. I can still. He screamed again as pain lanced through him, one eye rupturing under the stress just as the system forcibly ejected the cockpit. A heartbeat later, the Gurren ripped the Sutherland's head free and the entire machine detonated, flames washing over Colin's frame. Inside the cockpit, Colin did not flinch. I won't lose, she whispered. Not with this, not with the Gurren Mk2. From his barai, Zero watched it all with a hidden smirk. Every objective is proceeding as planned. The pieces are in position. Now all that remains is to strike at the enemy's stronghold. Elsewhere, inside the transport carrier holding the Lancelot, Suzaku sat in the open cockpit with growing unease. The rumble of the landslide had reached them even here, and every passing second without clarity made the tension in his chest worse. Lloyd, he asked, what's happening? At a nearby console, Lloyd adjusted his glasses and peered at the incoming reports. It's all very irregular. Suzaku frowned. Irregular. There are unconfirmed reports that the Black Knights have appeared, Lloyd said. Zero, Suzaku murmured. Lloyd brightened instantly. Well then, congratulations. This is our chance. Suzaku stared at him in disbelief. Lloyd. From beside the scientist, Cecile fixed Lloyd with a sharp glare. You are impossibly reckless. Lloyd blinked at her. What? Why? Cecile smiled sweetly in a way that made him visibly tense. Would you like the full explanation? No, I think I'll pass. He turned back to the monitors quickly. Until High Command finishes gathering data, we simply improvise. Suzaku barely heard him after that. In his mind, the image of Zero rose easily. And unbidden, another followed. Madara. He clenched his fists. They were so different from one another and from him. Yet both moved outside the law, both acted on their own judgment, both seized the world by force. Suzaku hated that part of him could see the strange thread connecting them. Back on the battlefield, Colin drove the Gurren into another enemy Sutherland. The frame's crimson hand locked onto the machine's chest, right over the cockpit. Move. The Britannian pilot inside screamed, trying desperately to wrench the nightmare backward. I can't lose to 11s. I am Britannian. The radiant wave surger activated again. The Sutherland exploded. Lord Kuehl. Valletta cried out, horrified to watch yet another pureblood fall to the Gurren's power. All right, Zero said, advancing with the remaining Black Knights. Gurren Mk2, proceed to the planned point. We'll break the rest of their line and move on Cornelia. Right, Colin answered, breaking away from Zero's formation at once. Fight to the death. Valletta shouted, raising her rifle and destroying one of the Black Knight beret after Colin moved out. From inside his cockpit, Lelouch watched the machine fall. That's right, he thought. Run. Fight. Die if you must. If you live through this, then you may truly call yourselves warriors. This was not merely battle. It was refinement. A crucible. He had already tested whether they would follow him. Now he was testing whether they deserved to stand beside him as Black Knights. The purebloods are actually holding the line. One of the strategists inside the Britannian Mobile Command Base asked in disbelief as he listened to the latest battlefield report. Yes, sir, the communications officer confirmed. They are maintaining their position under Lady Valletta's command. Then use that window to cover the Viceroy's withdrawal, a second strategist said immediately. Deploy air support. As things stood, the situation had become critical. More than half of Britannia's forces had been wiped out in the landslide, and what remained was steadily being ground down by the Black Knights and the JLF. If they lost Cornelia here, the entire operation would become a disaster. Standing near the main tactical table, Euphemia looked down at the map in silence while the strategists debated their next move. Then her eyes caught on something near the edge of the display. No, wait, Euphy said sharply, drawing all three men's attention. Something is approaching the Viceroy from behind. The strategists leaned in and saw at once that she was right. A unit was moving in fast on Cornelia's rear flank. Sub-Viceroy Euphemia, the chief strategist said urgently, you must act now. Deploy G1 at once. Euphy hesitated. But if we don't, another strategist pressed, Commander Guilford will be pinned down and unable to reach her. The Viceroy's life is at risk. Euphemia clenched her hands at her sides. She wanted to lash out at him for saying what she already knew, but she forced herself to stay composed. We can't, she said, her voice strained. There's a field hospital here, and civilians as well. They've been evacuated from all over the surrounding area and brought to this position. G1 is also our command center. My sister ordered me not to move it under any circumstances. That's why, she swallowed. I can't. Before anyone could argue further, one of the monitors flickered to life. Suzaku appeared on screen from inside the Lancelot's cockpit, with Lloyd and Cecile visible behind him. Well, hello there, Lloyd greeted brightly. The ASEEC team reporting in. Insolence. The chief strategist snapped. You are irregulars, one of the others added coldly. Your orders are to observe and remain silent. Ordinarily, yes, Cecile said, sounding just a little awkward. But waiting around is terribly dull, Lloyd cut in cheerfully. Then Suzaku leaned forward, looking directly at Euphemia. Sub-Viceroy Euphemia, I'm asking you, please deploy us. One of the strategists scoffed immediately. You simply want the glory of rescuing the Viceroy. Our whole army is already committed, the chief strategist added. And you expect us to stake everything on one unit. On an 11 pilot. Lloyd spread his hands. And if it fails, it's only one unit. Hardly a catastrophe, is it? But while the men argued, Suzaku and Euphemia were looking only at each other. Then, silently, Suzaku mouthed a single word. Yuffie. She stilled. He was not asking as a soldier. He was asking as her friend. Yes, Euphemia said quietly, though she was speaking more to Suzaku than to anyone else in the room. I understand. Then she lifted her head and gave the order. Deploy the Lancelot. Lloyd grinned. Excellent. Thank you, Your Highness, Cecile said sincerely. Suzaku bowed his head. I won't fail. The transmission ended. Far from the Britannian command center, another force was already moving. All units ready? Asked a man in his late 30s with short black hair and stern, steady eyes. He wore the old Japanese military uniform like a man who had never truly stopped being a soldier. This was Kiyoshiro Todo, the man who had once given Japan its lone victory against Britannia. Behind him waited the four holy swords, Shogo Asahina, Ryoga Senba, Kosetsu Urabe, and Nagasa Chiba. Yes, sir, they answered in unison. All right, Todo said. Deploy the custom beret. The custom beret moved out at once. Unlike the standard beret fielded by the JLF and the Black Knights, these units had distinctive antenna-like fins rising from their heads and carried heavy revolving blade swords that resembled chainsaw katanas. Even among them, Todo's own machine stood out, painted in a pale gray so light it nearly looked white. Listen carefully, Todo continued over the comm. If that landslide was man-made, then someone has just shattered Britannia's formation for us. We strike Cornelia from behind and take her now. This is our chance to repay what happened 7 years ago. Yes, sir, the four holy swords answered. By the honor of the four holy swords. Back on the battlefield, Cornelia saw the 5 beret approaching and her eyes widened slightly. What? A moment later, Todo's beret was upon her line. His revolving blade sheared clean through the arm of a Sutherland before he moved past it to destroy another. Behind him, the 4 holy swords proved just as deadly, carving through the shaken Britannian forces with disciplined precision. Protect Her Highness! Guilford shouted, driving his Gloucester in front of Cornelia's and intercepting Todo's next strike with his lance. Sparks exploded where the revolving blade met metal. Your Highness, leave them to us. You must withdraw. Cornelia watched the exchange, judged it instantly, and made her decision. Very well, she said. I know how to reverse this. Guilford. Yes, Your Highness. Drive them back and meet me at point 9. Guilford frowned for a fraction of a second, then realized what she intended. I understand. One of the holy swords broke through the line with another, angling toward Cornelia. Cornelia! He shouted. Cornelia responded without hesitation. She fired her Gloucesters/Harkins, forcing the 2 beret to defend, then thrust her lance straight through the opening she had created. The strike tore one of the enemy machine's arms away. Weaklings! She spat. Now enough of this. Secure 0. A moment later, another transmission reached her cockpit. Viceroy Cornelia. What is it? She demanded. The officer on the other end sounded shaken. We have received confirmed reports of Madara and the Izanagi. Cornelia's eyes narrowed. What? According to multiple surviving units, Madara is attacking everything in the area, our remaining forces and the JLF alike. The officer hesitated. What are your orders, Your Highness? Should we attempt to capture him? Cornelia was silent for a moment. Most of her strength had already been shattered. Trying to engage Madara now could cost her what little remained. No, she said at last. We cannot afford to divert our remaining units. Order all surviving forces to avoid Madara at all costs. Zero is the priority. Yes, Your Highness. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Todo opened a channel to General Katace while continuing his duel with Guilford. My apologies for the delay, General. Todo, Katace said, and the relief in his voice was impossible to miss. We've been waiting. Send all remaining units to my position, Todo ordered. Katace hesitated only a moment. Can you beat them? Yes, Todo said without wavering. If we can hold their main force long enough, we can turn this entire battle around. Across from him, Guilford's respect for his opponent was rising with every exchange. So this is him, Guilford thought, locking lances and blades once more. The so-called miracle worker of Area 11, Todo. Then come, Guilford muttered to himself. Show me what you can do. Their nightmares collided again. Elsewhere, Zero and the small group still with him were pinned behind a formation of rocks by the surviving purebloods, unable to advance cleanly. Maybe we should call Colin back, Tamaki suggested over the radio. No, Zero answered instantly. If we break formation now, the entire plan collapses. Beneath his mask, Lelouch's thoughts darkened. This is getting troublesome. If this drags on, we'll have the Royal Guard on us next. And if that happens, Cornelia slips away. Then Inoue's voice came over the comm. Zero. Cornelia's being attacked from below. Lelouch blinked. What? Which of our teams made the move? It isn't us, Inoue replied. Looks like the JLF. A smirk spread beneath Zero's mask. So someone else has grasped the same opportunity. Excellent. Todo and the four holy swords were now occupying the Royal Guard exactly as Lelouch needed. If they held them there, his route to Cornelia could still open. As if to prove how dangerous he was, Todo suddenly broke away from Guilford's immediate line, forcing the Royal Guard commander to readjust. Damn it, Todo muttered. He's stronger than I expected. Guilford seized the opening and hurled a chaos mine into the air. The cylindrical grenade detonated almost instantly, spraying a fan of hypervelocity projectiles in a murderous arc. Scatter! Todo barked. The holy swords obeyed at once, breaking apart just before the storm of rounds shredded the ground where they had been. When the fire died down, Urabe's voice came through the line. Lieutenant Colonel, what about Cornelia? Todo's expression remained hard. If Zero is the man I think he is, he said, then he's moving now. We trust him. Guilford heard that over the open channel and frowned. Zero is moving. At another point in the line, Valletta confirmed it. Yes. This is his projected route. A display appeared in Guilford's cockpit, showing Zero's likely path. His eyes widened. The trap Cornelia had intended to spring on Todo was now being turned against her. Princess Cornelia! Guilford shouted, trying to warn her before it was too late. Inside her Gloucester, Cornelia looked up and found herself staring directly at the waiting form of the Gurren Mk2. I got the message, Guilford. Cornelia said solemnly. After receiving Euphemia's authorization, the Special Corps backed the transport carrier holding the Lancelot right up to the edge of the landslide zone and opened the launch bay. Inside, Lancelot stood ready with improvised attachments fixed to its feet, broadening them like sand shoes so it could climb unstable terrain at combat speed. Advanced Weapon System Z-01 Lancelot, Cecile began over the comm. Utilize the sand panels to ascend the liquefied slope at maximum speed and rescue the Viceroy. Understood, Suzaku answered, taking one steadying breath inside the cockpit as he settled his grip on the controls. Then Lloyd's face appeared on one of the monitors. Suzaku, one question before you go. What is it? Suzaku asked. Lloyd folded his hands with curious seriousness that did not quite match his tone. More than anything, you hate seeing people die. Yet you chose the military. Why? Suzaku did not hesitate. Because I joined the military to stop people from dying. Lloyd smiled faintly. That contradiction will get you killed someday. Suzaku frowned, but before he could reply, Cecile grabbed Lloyd by the collar and yanked him out of frame. Sorry about that, Lloyd called hastily from somewhere off-screen. Suzaku let out a breath and focused forward again. Lancelot, launching. The white nightmare shot from the carrier and raced up the unstable slope. Cornelia! Colin shouted, driving the Gurren Mk2 straight at the Viceroy's custom Gloucester. Though surprised by the sudden approach of the Red Nightmare, Cornelia did not freeze. Low-born scum. Her spear shot forward in a vicious thrust, but the Gurren slipped around it and moved behind her. Colin swiped at the Gloucester's back with the Gurren's right arm, only for Cornelia to fire her slash Harkins into the mountainside and yank herself clear at the last possible second. Cornelia landed higher up along the wall of the pass and immediately realized something. This isn't just a customized unit. An alert flashed through her cockpit. An attack from behind. She dropped her Gloucester from the wall just as gunfire tore through the spot where she had been. When the dust cleared, Lelouch stood above in his Barai with Ogi and Tamaki flanking him. Can you hear me, Cornelia? Zero asked coolly. This is checkmate. Zero, Cornelia spat. Yes. Should we celebrate our reunion? Lelouch said, smug certainty coating every word. Of course, you'll have to surrender first. After that, there are a few things I'd like to ask you. Your reinforcements won't reach you in time. I win, Cornelia. Cornelia's eyes hardened. You are a fool, Zero. She turned sharply toward the Gurren. If I destroy this one, then I'm clear. Her rifle opened fire. The Gurren leapt aside in a blur. Cornelia followed with her slash Harkins, but Colin deflected them with the Gurren's knife before the lines could fully entangle her. Cornelia responded by hurling her lance. The Gurren caught it. Colin's eyes narrowed. She activated the Radiant Wave Surger. Cornelia watched her spear begin to distort and bulge unnaturally, and a split second later her Gloucester's right arm started doing the same. She jettisoned the entire arm at once. Before she could recover, more shots from above destroyed her rifle and ravaged the Gloucester's remaining arm. Cowards! Cornelia shouted, glaring up at Zero. Attacking from behind. Really? Lelouch replied, unbothered. And your own methods do not reek of cowardice. Below them, Guilford and the Royal Guard were steadily losing ground to Toto and the Four Holy Swords. Reinforcements were not coming. The units that might have reached them had already been destroyed, diverted, or swallowed by the chaos Zero had unleashed. At this rate, Guilford thought grimly. Her Highness will. Guilford. Cornelia's voice cut across the calm line, calm in a way he hated hearing. You and Darlton are to protect Yuffie. Your Highness. I will not surrender, Cornelia said flatly. Strength was returning to her voice now, sharpened by fury. As an imperial princess, I fight to the last. Then the mountain shook again. A section of the wall exploded inward in a roar of dust and broken stone. When the debris cleared, the Lancelot stood in the opening with its Varus raised. Inside the transport carrier, Cecile and Lloyd stared at the monitor feed. Oh my, Cecile breathed. Lloyd, black eye and all, looked delighted. Reckless as ever. He used the Varus to blast his way straight through the blockage. The Lancelot dropped to one knee beside Cornelia's damaged Gloucester. Viceroy, Suzaku said over the comm, are you all right? I came to assist. Cornelia looked up at the White Nightmare, openly surprised. The Special Corps. Who authorized this? Higher up, Tamaki stared down at the battlefield. Hey, isn't that? Yeah, Ogi muttered. The same one from Shinjuku. And Kawaguchi. Inside his Barai, Lelouch's expression darkened at once. Again. Him again. He fired immediately. The shots struck the Lancelot's green energy shield and scattered harmlessly. Gurren Mk2, Zero ordered sharply, destroy that unit at once. It has interfered enough. Right, Colin replied, already moving. The Gurren charged, but before red and white could collide, a third nightmare dropped between them. Everyone froze. The Izanagi landed hard, metal feet crushing stone beneath it. Its presence alone changed the shape of the battlefield. Not because it was larger than the other two. Because it felt heavier. Meaner. Like a machine that had not arrived to test itself, but to end something. Inside his Barai, Lelouch scowled. Madara. Why now? Cornelia's eyes narrowed. Colin instinctively pulled the Gurren back half a step. Even Suzaku hesitated. Then Madara's voice boomed from the Izanagi's external speakers. That's enough. This ends here. Madara, Zero said coolly, masking his irritation under smooth indifference. A timely arrival. Help us capture Cornelia, and together we can deal Britannia a decisive blow. The Izanagi turned, not toward Cornelia, but toward Zero. You caused the landslide, didn't you? Lelouch lifted an eyebrow. And if I did? The answer came back like a blade. How many people would have died if the city had not been warned? Madara demanded. Did you even care? In war, casualties are inevitable, Zero replied evenly. That is simply reality. They had nothing to do with your war, Madara shot back. They were civilians. And then the Izanagi moved. It surged straight for Zero. Stop! Colin shouted, throwing the Gurren in its path. Zero's not the enemy, Cornelia is. Madara ignored her completely. Gurren Mk2, Zero said, his voice turning cold, if Madara refuses to stand aside, then he is an enemy. Attack. Colin hesitated only for an instant, but it was enough. Cornelia used the opening at once, driving her crippled Gloucester forward. You deal with them, she snapped at Suzaku. I'll deal with Zero. Her slash Harkins fired toward the three beret above. Colin pivoted to pursue and the Lancelot dropped directly in front of her. Fine, she muttered, blue eyes hardening. Then I'll settle for you. The Gurren lunged. Suzaku met her with a kick, but Colin caught the leg in the Gurren's right hand and triggered the Radiant Wave Surger instantly. Suzaku ejected the damaged armor section a split second before the system could burn through it and sprang back. Then the Izanagi entered the fight. Its slash Harkins whipped across the battlefield in a blur, forcing both Gurren and Lancelot to break away. The fight collapsed into a brutal three-way clash. Lancelot struck first, slashing in low. The Gurren twisted aside and came back hard with its claw. The Izanagi slid between them, one wrist port snapping open as a Horizon-shaped MVS dagger launched forward on its cable in a dead straight line. Suzaku jerked Lancelot back just in time. The blade punched through a rock face behind him, then reeled back into the Izanagi's wrist with a metallic shriek. Colin's eyes widened. What the hell? She didn't get to finish. The Izanagi was already on her. It came in close with one of its MVS Kodachi in hand, the short blade flashing crimson at the edges as it slashed across the Gurren's guard. Colin blocked, caught the second strike, then nearly lost her balance when Madara pivoted and fired another cable dagger from the opposite wrist. She ducked it by inches. The blade screamed past her cockpit in a straight line, then snapped back just as fast. Damn it! Colin hissed. Lancelot rushed in again, taking advantage of the opening, and drove a knee toward the Izanagi's side. The hit should have connected. Instead, it passed through. Suzaku's eyes widened. The Izanagi shimmered, its frame distorting for a heartbeat as Lancelot's strike phased harmlessly through it. Phasing. Suzaku muttered. The Izanagi became solid again a fraction later and answered with brutal force. Its palm emitter flared. A compressed burst of energy hammered into Lancelot's chest and sent the White Nightmare skidding backward through mud and shattered stone. Colin came in from the side, trying to seize one of the Izanagi's arms with the Radiant Wave Surger. Madara met her head-on. The Izanagi drew both Kodachi in a single fluid motion, the blades crossing in front of the Gurren's claw as sparks exploded between them. Then one of the wrist ports snapped open again, and a dagger launched straight past Colin's shoulder. She twisted barely in time to avoid it. The cable went taut, and Madara used the tension to yank the Izanagi into a violent pivot, driving a knee into the Gurren's midsection hard enough to throw it back. Lancelot's Varus came up. Suzaku locked on and fired. Colin saw it too late. The beam screamed toward the Izanagi and Madara answered with a Rasengan. Chakra spiraled into a dense, whirling sphere in the Izanagi's palm, its glow building in a heartbeat. The machine drove the spinning mass forward, and the Varus shot struck it head-on. For one impossible instant, the two powers fought for dominance. Then the Rasengan overwhelmed it. The beam warped, broke apart, and burst outward in a violent spray of light. Suzaku stared. It overpowered the shot. Colin used the shock to move, closing on the Izanagi again with a furious strike. Madara turned just enough to avoid the Gurren's claw, let one slash rake across the Izanagi's shoulder, then phased again as Lancelot came in from the opposite side. Another kick, another sword strike, both passed through empty distortion. The moment the Izanagi solidified again, it punished them both. A cable dagger slammed into Lancelot's shield arm and ripped free before Suzaku could trap it. One Kodachi flashed low, nearly carving into the Gurren's knee joint. Another palm emitter blast forced Colin back a full body length. The three advanced nightmares tore across the battlefield in a blur of mud, sparks, and broken stone. Lancelot was fast. The Gurren was vicious. But the Izanagi fought like a machine that had already survived worse than either of them. Then Suzaku shifted tactics. He feinted high at the Izanagi and swung the Varus toward Colin. Colin's eyes widened. You bastard. She got the Gurren's right arm up just in time. The shot hit. The entire machine shuddered under the impact. The Gurren held the blast, but only barely, and the force drove it backward over the broken edge of the cliff. Colin. Ogi shouted. The Gurren vanished over the side. It crashed down the slope below and finally came to rest battered but intact. Colin let out a sharp breath, instantly checking her systems. Her relief lasted all of 2 seconds. The right arm was sparking violently. Damn it! Ogi and Tamaki came scrambling down after her in their beret. Colin. You okay? I'm fine, she said automatically, though she was still staring up toward the cliff where the fight continued without her. Then Zero's voice cut over the comm. Ogi. Report. The Gurren. Ogi checked quickly, then grimaced. The right hand's gone. We'll have to repair it. That was enough. Lelouch hated it, but without the Gurren, there was no chance of taking Cornelia while Lancelot and Madara were both still on the field. Retreat, he ordered at once. There was a sharp silence on the channel. Then he repeated it. All Black Knights, withdraw to your escape routes. This is now a war of attrition. Retreat. His Barai fired its /Harkins into the cliff wall and began climbing away. Below, Suzaku brought the Lancelot back near Cornelia's damaged Gloucester, though his gaze never fully left the battlefield. Viceroy. Cornelia didn't hesitate. Go after Zero. Suzaku glanced toward her damaged machine. But. My energy filler is spent, Cornelia snapped. Go. Right. The Lancelot launched after the retreating Black Knights. By the time Suzaku realized it, the Izanagi was gone. Just gone from the battlefield as suddenly as it had arrived. I hate this retreating crap, Tamaki complained as the Black Knights pulled back through the mountain paths, engines whining and feet grinding over loose rock. We hit them hard, Ogi said, trying to cut off the worst of Tamaki's grumbling before it got out of hand. But if we'd kept pushing, he let the rest go unsaid, trusting the others to fill in the blank themselves. With Cornelia still in play, the Royal Guard pressing from below, Lancelot on the field, and Madara interfering, continuing the fight would have been suicide. Before Colin or Tamaki could answer, another Barai slid into formation beside them. Hey, what happened? One of the pilots asked over the radio. He had only just finished off a single enemy unit and managed to keep a handful of new recruits from getting themselves killed when Zero's retreat order had come through. What's going on? What's going on? Tamaki said with a bitter laugh, as that we're leaving the JLF behind to hold the line while we make our getaway. And Madara. That guy attacked us. I knew we couldn't trust him. There was a beat of silence. What? The other pilot said, disbelief plain in his voice. No way. I hate to say it, Colin muttered, eyes flicking back toward the battlefield they were abandoning, but Tamaki's not wrong about what happened. Ogi frowned at that. I don't know what to think about Madara right now, he admitted. But until we know more, keeping our distance from him is probably the smartest thing we can do. He paused, then added more firmly, as for Zero, people aren't just pieces in a chess game. He wouldn't think like that. If he did, then we'd just be pawns to him too. Tamaki gave a doubtful snort, but Ogi pressed on anyway. His anger is real, he said. He hates Britannia as much as we do. And I think someone who knows that kind of anger also knows what sorrow feels like. None of them answered for a moment. Far behind them, another confrontation was already reaching its breaking point. Lelouch's escape was falling apart piece by piece. The Barai had already taken too much damage, and the Lancelot was on him like a hunting blade, faster, sharper, and far too relentless for Lelouch to shake. In the end, there was nothing left to do. He ejected. The cockpit blasted free, and Lelouch hit the ground hard. He rolled, dragged his helmet back on, and forced himself upright just in time to find the Lancelot's Varus aimed straight at him. Special Corps Head Trailer. Zero has been located, Suzaku said into his headset, keeping his voice level. Moving in for capture. Inside the cockpit, his grip on the controls was steady. His thoughts were not. Zero, I know you've saved people. I know there are Britannians and 11s who look at you and see hope. I know that much is real. His eyes narrowed behind the screen. But this is wrong. Your methods are wrong. He kept the rifle trained on Zero, ready to fire the instant the masked man moved. Then the trees behind Lelouch shifted. A girl stepped out from the shadows. Long green hair. Pale face. Suzaku blinked. That's, he murmured. The girl from the capsule in Shinjuku. He had only seen her for seconds that day. Blood loss, chaos, then gunfire, but something about her face caught at his memory anyway. CC walked straight toward Zero and stopped in front of him. Don't, she said, her voice low and absolute. Don't even think about hurting him. CC, Lelouch said behind her, clearly thrown. What are you doing here? Suzaku frowned. She's with Zero. Lelouch took a step toward her. Wait. CC ignored him. She walked all the way to the Lancelot's leg and pressed one hand against the white armor. It's a problem if you die, she murmured. In direct contact, but this should work. Hidden farther up the slope, Madara watched in silence. He had followed Suzaku after Zero broke away from the battlefield, but the moment CC appeared, he held back. Something about the energy around her had shifted. It no longer felt like the same focused force he had sensed from Lelouch. Inside the Lancelot, Suzaku went rigid. 1 second he was staring at the green-haired girl. The next, the cockpit was gone. The battlefield was gone. The weapon in his hands was gone. He stood in a white emptiness so vast it felt like it stretched forever. Somewhere in that endless blank, a broken clock ticked. A vase of flowers sat balanced on nothing. A man in a suit stood with his back turned. Then the man began to face him. Suzaku knew who it was before he saw the whole of his face. Father, he whispered. Genbu Kururugi looked at him. Suzaku's breath hitched. You're dead. The dead man kept walking toward him. That's impossible. No, Suzaku stumbled back, panic rising in his voice. I didn't mean to. Outside, the Lancelot stood perfectly still. The silence around it was the only warning that something was terribly wrong. Zero moved first, stepping out of the line of fire. Hey, Lelouch snapped. Are you using Geass on him? From his hidden vantage point, Madara narrowed his eyes. The force radiating from CC was pulsing wildly now. So there are different kinds of Geass. If Lelouch's came through direct eye contact, and CC could do this through physical contact, Madara's gaze sharpened. Would the Sharingan resist both? Or only his? I bought you time, CC said over her shoulder. Go. What about you? Lelouch demanded. I can't move yet. Just go. Don't be ridiculous, Lelouch snapped. I can't keep owing you favors. He grabbed her shoulder. The instant he did, everything broke. No, CC gasped, and for the first time there was real fear in her voice. Not now. Madara moved immediately. He blurred from his hiding place and closed the distance in an instant. Too late, Lelouch's hand on CC's hand on the Lancelot. Madara reaching in to tear them apart. The connection widened before he could stop it. The world ruptured. Images hit him too quickly to make sense of at first. A church. Stone walls. A little girl with green hair. A woman dressed like a nun, sorrow and cruelty mixed together in her face, a sigil burning on her forehead. Blood. Fire. Death. The feeling of a life being stripped bare, layer by layer. Stay out of my head, CC cried somewhere in the storm. Stop it, you're tearing everything open. But it wasn't just her memories anymore. Something inside Madara, something warm, human, broken, and fiercely alive, caught in the unstable bond. The visions changed. CC saw Naruto. Not the man he was now. A younger Naruto. And not alone. She saw Mito. She saw Lelouch. She saw Suzaku. All 4 of them as children in the Namikaze household, noisy and impossible and painfully alive. Naruto and Mito racing through the halls while Kushina shouted after them. Lelouch sitting stiffly at a table, trying and failing to preserve his dignity while Naruto grinned across a badly arranged chessboard. Suzaku laughing so hard he nearly fell over while Mito accused all three boys of cheating. Then more. The four of them older, quieter, gathered beneath a tree in a garden. Mito half asleep against Naruto's shoulder. Suzaku talking earnestly about some promise only children could make sound eternal. Lelouch pretending not to care while listening to every word. Naruto looking at all of them with a warmth so open it hurt to witness. She saw rain at a window. Naruto and Lelouch sitting together while Nunnally slept nearby, the two boys talking softly about the future. She saw Suzaku standing bruised beside Naruto after training, both of them smiling through exhaustion. She saw Mito crying when Naruto came home hurt, only to hit him furiously for scaring her before hugging him too tightly to breathe. And then the memories darkened. Responsibility. Pressure. Fear. The strain of trying to hold everyone together while the road beneath them kept splitting apart. And then, Inko. Rain. A street washed in cold water and blood. Naruto at 14, kneeling in the road with a dying girl in his arms. The sound of gunfire. Britannian soldiers laughing. Inko trying to smile through blood at her lips. You're lucky I like you. Then silence. Then grief. CC. Felt the moment the Mangekyo Sharingan awakened in both his eyes. Felt the rage that followed. Soldiers torn out of the world in spiraling distortions of grief and fury. Naruto standing in the rain, shaking, with blood on his hands and no way to fix what had been taken. The force of it hit CC. Like a knife. So that was where some of the darkness in him had begun. Not all of it, but enough. CC. Then felt a chill down her spine as she appeared what looked like a sewer, with a gate and a large nine-tailed fox glaring at her. The four connected minds CC, Suzaku, Lelouch, and Madara, seemed to stand for one impossible instant in the same shattered place, seeing too much of one another and understanding too little. Then it collapsed. Stop. CC. Cried, tears spilling freely down her face. Please. Madara tore Lelouch away from her. He did it hard enough that Zero stumbled backward, hit the ground, and cracked the side of his helmet against the rock. Lelouch went limp almost immediately. Inside the Lancelot, Suzaku screamed. I had to do it. His horror twisted into blind panic. The Lancelot jerked violently and opened fire in every direction. What the hell did you do to him? Madara shouted, barely dodging the first spray of shattered stone and explosive debris. CC was trembling, still trying to steady herself after everything she had just seen. We have to go, she said, voice unsteady. Now. She didn't get another step. A blast from the Varus struck the ground nearby, and jagged fragments of stone tore into her. She cried out and collapsed. CC. Madara moved on instinct. Two shadow clones split off from him instantly. One of you take Zero, he ordered. The other takes her. Move. The clones obeyed without hesitation. One grabbed the unconscious Lelouch. The other scooped up the injured CC. As carefully as possible and both vanished into the trees at speed. Madara himself turned back toward the out-of-control Lancelot. The Varus was still firing, each shot ripping apart trees and blasting craters through the slope. He weaved through the barrage, cutting aside the larger chunks of debris with Akashini while letting the rest pass around him by inches. He got close enough. Wind chakra surged through the blade. The blade lengthened with a hiss of force, and Madara cut clean through the Lancelot's arm at the elbow. The severed limb, and the Varus with it, crashed to the ground in a shower of sparks. Even disarmed, the Lancelot kept thrashing, pistons screaming as Suzaku remained trapped inside whatever nightmare CC's Geass had forced him to relive. Madara considered finishing it, then dismissed the thought. That problem belonged to Britannia now. Without another word, he turned and vanished into the trees after his clones. By the time Madara found them again, they had taken shelter in a narrow cave hidden behind a ledge of broken rock. Lelouch lay off to one side, unconscious and breathing steadily. At worst, he would wake with a pounding headache and bruised pride. CC had fared worse. Several fragments of stone were embedded in her side and shoulder, and blood had soaked through what remained of her torn clothing. Madara had removed his cloak and laid it over her while he worked. The Kyuubi's voice rumbled through him as he knelt there. She heals quickly. I noticed. He had removed the larger shards first, then waited. Sure enough, the wounds were already closing far faster than any normal human body should have allowed. With the kind of power she carries, the Kyuubi observed, and how fast she recovers, she's closer to a pseudo-Biju or some unnatural hybrid of human and something else than an ordinary person. Madara remained silent, looking down at her. The fragments he had seen of her past were too broken to fully understand, but the pain had been real. The loneliness too. He studied her face as she slept, trying not to think too hard about the scar he had seen over the left side of her chest while treating her wounds. A single imperfection on skin otherwise untouched. His thoughts were interrupted when CC murmured in her sleep. Madara leaned closer, pushing a bit of chakra into his ears to hear. You finally said my real name. A faint, fragile smile touched her lips. He sat back at once, guilt hitting him unexpectedly. Her real name, he thought. Names mattered. He knew that. Hearing it when she had never meant to give it to him felt wrong. The Kyuubi said nothing. A few minutes later, CC stirred awake. So you're finally up, Madara said lightly. You shouldn't move too much. I only just pulled the shrapnel out. That was unnecessary, she replied evenly, though she still gathered his cloak tighter around herself as she sat up. Her gaze immediately shifted to Lelouch lying nearby. Is he? He's alive. Just unconscious. She let out the smallest breath of relief. Then she looked back at him, expression unreadable. All of you are the same, she said. You people with hero complexes, always rushing in to save the damsel. Were you expecting a reward? Not really. That answer clearly caught her off guard. Then why? Madara tilted his head slightly. Do I need a special reason to do the right thing? CC stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head. You really are an idiot. A grin pulled at the corner of his mouth beneath the mask. I hear that a lot. Then he sobered. There's something I need to tell you. CC tensed, curiosity winning over caution for the moment. What? Madara reached up, removed his mask, and took a slow breath before meeting her eyes directly. He said her real name. CC's eyes widened. Then they narrowed into a glare. You have a terrible habit of eavesdropping. I'm sorry, Naruto said honestly. I didn't mean to hear it. But, he hesitated, then smiled faintly. It's a beautiful name. For just an instant, the smallest blush touched her face before she forced it away. Is that supposed to make me feel better? She asked, voice unsteady despite her effort. As if it matters anymore. I've forgotten everything else. So what use is it, a name? Why? Her voice broke. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Without thinking, Naruto reached out and wiped them away. It matters, he said softly. CC's gaze snapped back to his face. It's proof we exist, Naruto continued. A way of saying who we are to the world. Titles, symbols, masks, those can all hide someone, even when people think they know them. He glanced briefly at his own mask lying beside him. They may know Madara. They may think they understand what he stands for. But they'd never really know me. Then he looked back at her. But now I can see you. Not just CC, the mysterious girl with impossible healing and too many secrets. I can see someone who's known pain, loneliness, sadness. His expression gentled. And from this point on, I won't pretend that isn't real. If the world feels too heavy to face alone, then you won't have to face it alone. CC stared at him, tears still sliding soundlessly down her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost too soft to hear. Then, can you do me a favor? Sure. Say it again, she whispered. My real name. The way you did before. Just once. Naruto nodded. He moved a little closer and placed his hand against her cheek again. Her breath caught. Then he said it, gently, carefully, like something precious. For a moment, the cave was silent except for the faint dripping of water somewhere deeper inside. How was that? He asked quietly. CC swallowed. It was nice. Naruto's grin returned, warm and a little bashful. I'm glad. Then he abruptly looked away, face coloring slightly. You should probably get dressed, though. Your clothes took a beating. After she managed that, and after Naruto awkwardly promised not to use her real name again unless she gave him permission, they waited in uneasy silence for the third person in the cave to wake. When Zero finally stirred, his hand went instinctively for the gun that was no longer at his side. Madara held it up briefly, just enough to show he had removed it while Lelouch was unconscious. Relax, he said. If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't have dragged you out of there. Zero said nothing, but the tension in his posture made it obvious he didn't appreciate finding Madara and CC alone together while he'd been out cold. He pulled out his phone instead and contacted Colin, giving her their location. Before long, the Gurren's footsteps could be heard outside the cave, followed by hurried footsteps entering. Zero. Colin burst in. Are you alright? Then she saw the other masked figure. Her whole body tensed. You. CC, still wearing Naruto's cloak over her damaged jumpsuit, stood a little farther back. Colin's eyes flicked from her to Madara and back again. What are you doing here? She demanded, glaring at him with obvious betrayal. Enough, Madara said, stepping away from Zero and CC. There's been enough fighting for one day. Enough fighting. Colin shot back. You attacked Zero. I stayed long enough to make sure nothing else happened, he replied. That's all. He walked past her. Then, just before leaving the cave, he paused. Until next time, CC. And then he was gone. Leaving behind two people staring after him. One wondering how much of that exchange she had really understood. And the other wondering just how well Madara and CC seemed to know each other now. A few days had passed since the battle at Narita, where the Black Knights had made their first true large-scale move against Cornelia and her army since the Lake Kawaguchi incident. Rumors of the Gurren Mk2 had become reality, and the damage done to Britannia's prestige in Area 11 was still being felt. Even with the Japan Liberation Front nearly broken, the operation had come far too close to becoming a total disaster for Cornelia's forces. Within the White Castle-like Britannian government building, Cornelia, Euphemia, and a select group of senior staff were gathered for a strategy meeting. The Japan Liberation Front was nearly annihilated during your Narita operation, Viceroy, one Britannian official said, clearly hoping to curry favor. He was a nervous-looking man with brown hair and a mustache that connected to his sideburns, the acting minister of Area 11. We are currently hunting down the surviving remnants one by one. Cornelia gave him a flat, icy look. Are you mocking me? The official stiffened. No, Your Highness, I only meant. We are still rebuilding our command structure after that fiasco, Cornelia said coldly. Do not mistake survival for victory. The minister immediately fell silent. Guilford stepped in next, his own frustration plain. The occupation government bears responsibility for part of this failure, he said sharply. The subway lines, old mining railways, and forgotten transit routes running beneath this country have been left largely unchecked. In the ghettos, registries and property records are falsified while insurgent activity spreads. That caught Euphemia's attention. She kept her expression calm, but she thought at once of the transport routes the Namikaze Corporation depended on for moving supplies, medicine, and relief goods across Area 11. The tunnel network extends across almost the entire country, the minister said uneasily. We cannot simply collapse all of it. We don't have the manpower or budget to do such a thing. The rebels are using those routes as strike corridors and escape paths, Guilford replied. The minister swallowed. Prince Clovis had chosen not to move too aggressively on the issue, he said, glancing nervously toward Cornelia. His position had been that forcing the matter too strongly might further destabilize the region and invite intervention from the Chinese Federation. He hesitated, then continued. And, there was also an understanding in place regarding the Namikaze Corporation's use of those lines. Not with Prince Clovis directly, but stemming from arrangements made earlier with Minato Namikaze. The corporation's distribution network relies heavily on those routes, and disrupting them would impact supply movement across all of Area 11. That drew a slight narrowing of Cornelia's eyes. I was not aware my late brother had inherited agreements of that scale. The arrangement predates his administration, the minister said quickly. Minato Namikaze had pressed for continuity in logistics planning long before the current situation worsened. The corporation supplies a substantial volume of consumer goods, medical equipment, and emergency aid throughout the area. It was considered prudent not to interfere with that. Cornelia's expression did not soften. Since when does the governance of an occupied territory answer to a businessman? The minister nearly wilted under her gaze. It does not, Your Highness. Final authority remained with Britannia at all times. The understanding was only logistical. Before Cornelia could continue, Euphemia spoke. Sister, I ask that the subways and railways not be destroyed. The room's attention shifted to her. Yuffie held their gaze steadily. The Namikaze Corporation uses those routes for the movement of critical supplies, she said. After Narita, those supplies are already being redirected to relief and treatment efforts. That includes food, equipment, and medicine for both civilians and soldiers. It is not only 11s who benefit from that distribution. Cornelia regarded her for a moment. And what would you suggest instead, Sub-Viceroy? The practical answer is increased monitoring, Euphemia replied. Checkpoint control, registry inspection, and patrol placements at vulnerable points in the system. We can seal abandoned sections that have no active function and reinforce the rest. Cornelia's eyes sharpened. Do you believe we have the troops to spare? Can we afford not to? Euphemia countered gently but firmly. If we destroy too much at once, desperation will spread. That would only hand Zero and the Black Knights more people willing to rally to them. That argument carried enough truth that no one interrupted her. We should increase oversight, not cripple infrastructure, Euphemia finished. That allows us to limit rebel movement while preserving the routes needed for relief and civil stability. Cornelia was silent for a moment. Then she nodded once. The Chinese Federation and the discontented elements within Area 11 already have enough excuses to challenge us, she said. We will not provide more. We will do as Euphemia suggested. The railways and subways will remain in operation where useful, and surveillance will be tightened. Seal what serves no purpose. Watch everything else closely. Several officers immediately began taking notes. Euphemia allowed herself the smallest private smile. It was a small victory, but a real one. Darlton finished writing down the order and continued the meeting. Minister, he said, drawing the man's anxious attention again. Internal Affairs has also raised concerns regarding the NAC. The minister tensed at once. Their involvement with anti-Britannian networks remains unproven, he said quickly. Unproven is not the same as impossible, Darlton replied. The Narita landslide buried any evidence we might have recovered, but our suspicions remain. If we suppress them now, the minister began, the 11 economy could collapse outright. Even with the Namikaze Corporation providing support, the resulting instability would damage tax extraction, labor organization, and urban recovery. Euphemia frowned at the way he said it. Not because the logic was false, but because the lives involved were being reduced to little more than numbers on a balance sheet. Cornelia, too, looked unimpressed. And while you concern yourself with ledgers, she said coldly, Zero remains free. The minister faltered. We analyzed the remnants of the barrier machine recovered after Narita, he said, eager to offer something. There is no doubt the Black Knights were behind the operation. But the bodies we recovered yielded little useful intelligence. So, Cornelia said, her contempt rising, you cannot catch Zero, you hesitate to move against Kyoto, and you offer excuses in place of results. Tell me, Minister, are you familiar with the word incompetent? The man went pale. While the others continued speaking, Euphemia's attention drifted briefly to the report files open on the monitor before her. Several images from Narita were displayed there: Lancelot, the Gurren Mk2, and the Izanagi, all captured in fragmented battlefield photographs. Even still, their silhouettes carried an impossible kind of presence. Her gaze shifted to the casualty reports. Names. Dozens and dozens of names. Yuffie's expression dimmed. War truly is terrible, she thought. Even when fewer died than might have, it is still too many. She thought back to the warning she had received before Narita, and to the decision she had made afterward. She had pushed for evacuation logistics before the operation fully unfolded. She had not known whether it would be enough. Now, At least, some of those names had been spared from becoming a far longer list. Once the meeting concluded, Cornelia withdrew to her office, her mood no better than before. The failure at Narita still clung to the room like smoke. Not long after, there was a knock at the door. Enter. Guilford stepped inside. Your Highness. Cornelia looked up. What is it? Lloyd Asplund has completed his analysis of the black flames discovered at the base of the Narita slope. That immediately sharpened her attention. Send him in. A moment later, Lloyd entered with his usual unbothered manner, hands in his pockets and expression almost cheerful. Not the best day to interrupt, is it? Speak plainly, Asplund, Cornelia said. What did you learn? Lloyd's smile thinned slightly. The bad news first, then. We learned very little. Cornelia's expression darkened. The black flames were unlike anything I've ever seen, Lloyd continued. Not just because of the color. They did not spread like normal fire. They remained concentrated, almost selective, but anything that touched them was consumed. Slowly, completely, and at temperatures that made most of our instruments malfunction before they could provide reliable readings. And the cause? Lloyd shrugged slightly. Unknown. We could not identify any substance in the area that would account for them. Conventional extinguishing methods were ineffective. The flames lasted for days before dying out on their own. He tilted his head. However, there is a useful note in the local reports. According to surviving civilian witnesses, many of the people in the city would have died if not for the evacuation effort ordered in time and the black flames stopping the center of the landslide. Several accounts specifically credit the rapid movement of people to orders relayed through the sub-viceroy's channels. Efficient work, by the way. Apparently even I was impressed. Euphemia, who had entered quietly a moment earlier, looked mildly surprised to hear him say it so bluntly. Lloyd went on. As for the flames themselves, those same witnesses place the Izanagi at the scene immediately before they appeared. Cornelia leaned back in her chair. So Madara is responsible. That would be the most likely conclusion, Lloyd said. At present, yes. When he was dismissed and left, the room grew quiet again. Guilford looked toward Cornelia, waiting. The dark pink-haired princess was deep in thought. At length, she spoke. That man, Madara. Her eyes narrowed. He becomes more dangerous every time he appears. In a dark room lit only by the glow of a small fire pit, the kind once common in Japanese homes, 5 men sat in a loose circle. Though each wore different clothing, there was no mistaking that they were all Japanese. Shadows danced across the walls as the fire crackled softly between them. So, an elderly bald man in a kimono and haori said at last, lowering the report in his hands, the Britannian viceroy has gone this far already. With the Liberation Front shattered, another man said bleakly, the last flames of Japan have nearly gone out. No, a third man cut in sharply. Not yet. Toto is still alive. He is still fighting. Even so, the second man replied, unconvinced, he lost his custom beret. Without them, what hope is left? Before the argument could continue, a young female voice spoke from behind a set of hanging straw blinds. There is still hope. The room fell silent. Though her figure was hidden behind the screen, everyone present knew exactly who she was. A young girl of about 14, with long black hair and forest green eyes, dressed in garments that seemed to blend the elegance of a princess with the grace of a shrine maiden. The Black Knights? The old man asked, glancing back over his shoulder. You've been captivated by Zero ever since he and Madara rescued Suzaku Kururugi. We even sent Zero the Gurren Mk2 on your recommendation. A smile touched the girl's unseen lips. And look at what they did with it. The old man let out a slow breath, then nodded. You do have a point. He turned his gaze back to the fire. According to the reports, Zero and the Black Knights have pushed the Gurren well beyond what we expected. They've used it to its fullest potential and in ways our own engineers had not imagined. They fulfilled the condition we gave them when we sent the machine, another of the men reminded him. So they have, the old man murmured thoughtfully. Then a grin spread across his face. In that case, it is time we uphold our end of the arrangement. We will meet with Zero and discuss the possibility of giving the Black Knights our support. His grin widened just a little. And, he added, we will present them with one further condition. At Ashford Academy, Shirley sat in her usual seat in the student council room, staring down at the 2 tickets in her hands. They had been given to her by Naruto weeks ago, tickets to a major concert sponsored by the Namikaze Corporation, and yet she still had not worked up the courage to ask Lelouch to go with her. It did not help that Lelouch and Colin had happened to be absent on the same day again. Shirley knew she was probably overthinking it. She had seen Colin slap Lelouch when things looked like they might turn awkward between them, and it was obvious to anyone with eyes that Colin was interested in Naruto. But knowing that did not make Shirley feel any less uneasy. Love made people irrational. It made them second-guess themselves. It made the smallest coincidence feel like a disaster waiting to happen. Her thoughts drifted for a second, and Shirley felt her face warm as she remembered the embarrassing moment when Suzaku had fallen on top of her and Naruto had walked in at exactly the wrong time. Across the room, Millie Ashford was pretending to work while very obviously keeping an eye on her friend. She had noticed Shirley's mood the moment she came in, and seeing the orange-haired girl blushing to herself finally pushed Millie's curiosity past its breaking point. All right, Millie said, leaning back in her chair. What's on your mind? Constipated. Your monthly. Huh. Shirley sputtered, her blush deepening for an entirely different reason. And no, it's not that. Ah, Millie said with a knowing grin. So you're lonely because Lelouch is gone, aren't you? Shirley slumped a little in her chair. It's more like Colin is absent the same day he is, again. Millie let out a sigh and tipped her head back dramatically. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is still trying to recover from Narita. Suzaku's been out for 2 days because of everything that happened, and Naruto has practically been living at Namikaze Corp trying to help with relief and cleanup. At the mention of Suzaku, Mito, who was seated at the far end of the room with a notebook open in front of her, quietly looked down at the page she had not written on in several minutes. She had been trying to focus. She really had. But every time someone mentioned Narita or Suzaku's name, her mind wandered right back to him. To how exhausted he had looked the last time she saw him. To how he always carried too much on his shoulders and still smiled anyway. To the way he had held her so tightly during the extremist attack, like he was trying to shield her from the whole world. Mito's fingers tightened slightly around her pen before she forced herself to relax. He's okay, she reminded herself. He has to be okay. Shirley, still in the middle of her crisis, flushed with guilt. I know that. I know there are more important things going on, but Lulu and Colin being absent together is serious. Millie giggled. I envy you, Shirley. That's what I love about you. From another corner of the room, Nina looked up from the notes she had been quietly working through and blinked at the contradiction. Huh. Don't make fun of me. Shirley said, dropping the tickets onto the desk in front of her. I don't know what you're worried about anyway, Millie said with a shrug. It's obvious Colin has a crush on Naruto. So you think so too? Shirley asked, relieved for all of 2 seconds before her anxiety found a new direction. But they don't really spend time together outside of school, do they? What if Colin loses interest in Naruto and starts paying attention to Lulu instead? Millie actually paused at that. That, she admitted thoughtfully, is a point. Mito looked up at that, mildly distracted from her own thoughts, while Nina kept listening with the kind of quiet discomfort that suggested she wasn't sure whether she should be hearing any of this at all. We'll have to do something about that, Millie decided, before abruptly refocusing on Shirley. But really, if you're that worried, just tell him already. 3 simple words. I like you. Shirley's whole face turned red. I can't. I just can't. Because what if he rejects you, and it ruins your friendship? Millie guessed before Shirley could finish. Then she laughed. You don't have to laugh that hard, Shirley muttered, pouting. Millie's laughter faded into a softer smile. You know, she said, glancing out the window, it's comfortable, isn't it? This place. The way we all are together. Shirley's expression softened. Yeah, it is. But things don't stay the same forever, Millie said quietly. Her mind, already full of Suzaku, drifted unwillingly to the idea that all of this, Ashford, the student council, lazy afternoons and silly arguments could vanish one day. Shirley looked suddenly solemn. Millie noticed and waved both hands. Oh, come on, don't take me too seriously. I'm just saying if it's bothering you, you should ask him the next chance you get. Then the student council president's eyes shifted toward the door, and a sly smile crossed her face. So, Millie said, how do you feel about your chances now? Shirley blinked in confusion. Then the door slid shut behind someone, and she nearly jumped out of her chair. Lulu. Lelouch stood just inside the room, dressed in casual clothes instead of his uniform, a black shirt, jeans, and a red jacket with black accents. I thought you were absent, Shirley said, still flustered. Nunnally had a fever this morning, and Sayoko was busy, Lelouch replied in his usual calm tone. So I stayed home. Oh, Shirley said awkwardly. Is she feeling better? A little. He turned his attention to Millie. Madam President, those papers. Oh, right. Millie gestured vaguely toward the stack in front of Shirley, accidentally including the tickets in the pile. Can you organize all of those by year and class? Sure. Lelouch picked them up without noticing the tickets mixed in with the forms. You really do have a talent for ordering people around, he said. And you are an excellent subordinate, Millie replied cheerfully. Subordinate, Lelouch muttered under his breath as he headed out. Only after he had gone did Shirley glance down and realize the tickets were gone. My tickets. She shot to her feet. Millie. Then she bolted out of the room. Outside, Lelouch had almost reached the path leading away from the council building when he heard her calling after him. Lulu. He stopped and turned. What is it? Shirley came to a halt in front of him, clutching her skirt nervously. My tickets, I think they might have gotten mixed in with the paperwork. Lelouch looked down, noticed the pair of tickets tucked between the documents, and pulled them free. Oh, sorry. He handed them back to her. So these are the famous tickets Rivals has been sulking about, he said lightly. Well, I hope you enjoy yourself. That should have been the end of it. But Shirley had already come this far. Her heart hammered in her chest as she forced herself to hold on to the moment before it slipped away. Lulu. Lelouch blinked, surprised by the sudden determination in her voice. Shirley. From the window of Lelouch's room above, CC watched the scene below in silence. She had figured out what was happening almost immediately. Shirley was asking Lelouch to go with her to the concert. It was still two teenagers, nervous and hopeful and ordinary, trying to do something as simple as go somewhere together. And CC, for reasons she did not enjoy examining too closely, envied them. Not because of Lelouch. Not really. But because they could do it at all. Even with the bracelet Naruto had given her, even with the small freedom it allowed, Lelouch still did not like her leaving the student council building. He did not know what the bracelet could actually do, and she had not felt like explaining it to him. So she remained there more often than not, watching other people move through their ordinary lives. A date. Such a small thing. Such a human thing. And yet, standing there at the window, CC found herself thinking not of Lelouch or Shirley, but of a certain blonde-haired shinobi. Of Naruto looking at her in that cave with impossible sincerity. Of the way he had said her real name like it was something precious. Of how absurdly warm it had felt to sit beside him, wrapped in his cloak, while he spoke to her like she mattered. For a fleeting, dangerous moment, CC let herself imagine what it might be like to go somewhere with him like this, not because of war or secrets or necessity, but because he simply wanted to be with her. The thought made her chest tighten in a way she found deeply irritating. She crossed her arms and looked away from the window for half a second. Then she looked back down at Shirley again. The girl was still gathering her courage. CC sighed softly. How foolish, she murmured, though there was little bite in it. Then her expression shifted, warming almost imperceptibly as Naruto drifted through her thoughts again. If anyone ever did take me on a proper date, she thought, it would have to be someone hopelessly earnest, someone reckless enough to mean every word he said. Her gaze softened. Someone like Naruto. At that same moment, far across campus on another rooftop, a silver-haired man in a long pale coat stood watching the student council building through a visor. His attention, however, was not on Shirley or Lelouch. It was on CC. A faint, unpleasant smirk crossed his face. Back below, Shirley took in one breath, then another. This was it. Lelouch, she said, trying with all her strength not to lose her nerve, would you, maybe, like to go with me? She held up the tickets with trembling fingers. To the concert. For a second, Lelouch just stared at her. Then Shirley's courage finally broke and she looked away so quickly that it was almost painful. After the briefest pause, Lelouch answered. And whatever he said, it was enough to make Shirley's eyes go wide. A second later she spun and ran off, cheeks burning bright red, ducking behind the side of a nearby building as soon as she was out of sight. I did it, she whispered, half in disbelief, half in delight. I actually did it. Then doubt began creeping back in almost immediately. He'll come, right? I mean, he didn't say no. It's just a concert. A concert. That's not really a big deal, but it's still a chance. Her hands tightened around the tickets. Then she smiled. And it's all thanks to Naruto. Eyes stared wearily up at the remains of a ruined building. No matter which direction he looked, the sight was much the same. The man lying beneath the debris had short brown hair, a face lined with age, and wore a plain gray suit now caked with dirt and torn in several places from the landslide. At first, when he realized he had not been buried alive, he had thought it was a miracle. After 2 days trapped under the rubble, he was no longer sure it had been mercy and not some cruel joke. He had been in the middle of evacuating the city under military orders when the landslide struck. In those few frantic seconds before everything went black, he had seen something impossible, a crimson nightmare in a wall of black flames. Then the mountain had come down on them. When he awoke, relief had come first. Then reality. The collapsed building beside him had shielded him from the worst of the slide, but it had also become his prison. His legs were pinned beneath broken stone and twisted beams too heavy for him to shift. 2 days later he was exhausted, thirsty, starving, and too weak to keep hoping anyone would find him. I guess this is it, he thought numbly, his eyes slipping shut. Then he heard it. A grinding, metallic rumble. His eyes snapped open. A thin shaft of light pierced the darkness above him. Dust drifted down as the opening widened, growing larger and larger until the head of a white nightmare with glowing green eyes and a golden faceplate came into view. A moment later it pulled back, and a human figure leaned over the gap in its place. Hey! Are you all right down there? A young male voice shouted, urgent and worried. Hang on. We'll get you out. The young man activated a radio. This is Warrant Officer Suzaku Kururugi. I've found a survivor. Requesting immediate medical support. The trapped man only managed to make out a teenage face, slightly curly brown hair, green eyes, Japanese features, before the darkness took him again. Back at the Namikaze household, Naruto sat alone in one of the living room chairs, staring at nothing while the last of the afternoon light spilled through the windows. The house was quieter than usual. Not silent, not really. His mother was cooking dinner, Mito was doing homework in her room. But around him, everything felt muted, distant, like the world had lowered its voice and left him alone with his thoughts. And his thoughts were still in Narita. He had been sitting there long enough for the stillness to start bothering someone. Inside the space of the seal, Naruto stood before the Kyuubi, the two of them separated by the same iron bars and the same old tension that had defined nearly every conversation they'd ever had. The giant fox stared down at him, red eyes narrowed in clear irritation. Naruto crossed his arms. You keep looking at me like that, he said, and I'm gonna start thinking you actually care. The Kyuubi's lip curled. Don't test me, brat. Naruto smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. You're the one who started glaring first. Because you're brooding, the Kyuubi shot back. And you only ever get this quiet when something's bothering you. Naruto let out a slow breath through his nose. You say that like you know me too well. I do. The fox's voice rolled through the seal space, deep and unimpressed. I've been with you your whole life. Don't act surprised. That took some of the edge out of Naruto's expression. He looked away for a second, then back. Narita threw me off, he admitted. Lancelot and that red nightmare that Colin has now actually kept up with the Izanagi. The Kyuubi said nothing, only watched. Naruto went on. I always knew this world would adapt. I knew people would build stronger weapons eventually. But actually seeing it happen, he shook his head. I don't like it. You don't like that they're catching up, the QB corrected. Naruto frowned. Would you? A low rumble came from the fox, somewhere between a growl and a humorless laugh. No, he said. But I'm not foolish enough to be shocked by it. Naruto raised a brow. The QB leaned closer to the bars. You have chakra. The Sharingan. The Izanagi. Your father's name. The resources of an entire corporation behind you. Did you really think the world was just going to sit still and let that exist unanswered? Naruto didn't respond. Because he knew better than to pretend the fox was wrong. They see power, the QB continued, and people always do the same thing. They either fear it, or they try to surpass it. Naruto clicked his tongue, but still didn't argue. The QB's eyes narrowed further. The real problem isn't that they're getting stronger. The problem is that you still haven't decided how far you're willing to go. Naruto's expression hardened immediately. I know how far I'm willing to go. Do you? The fox asked flatly. Because what I saw at Naruto wasn't conviction. It was instinct. You reacted. You protected what you could. You saved who you could. But you were still reacting. Naruto's jaw tightened. That's not the same as moving toward an end. The words hit harder than Naruto wanted them to. He looked up sharply. So what? You want me to become more ruthless? I want you, the QB growled, to stop stumbling forward and pretending instinct will always be enough. Silence settled between them after that. Naruto was the first to break it. I'm not going to become the kind of person who throws other people away just to win. The QB's ears twitched. I didn't say you should. Naruto blinked. The fox huffed in annoyance. Don't look so shocked. I know exactly what kind of person you are. His lip curled again. Unfortunately. That pulled the faintest twitch from the corner of Naruto's mouth. The QB saw it and looked even more irritated. What you need, he said, is to stop acting like your strength alone is enough. Naruto held his gaze. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then Naruto spoke quietly. You mean we need to work together? The QB looked like he'd been personally insulted. I mean, he said slowly, with obvious reluctance, that if this world keeps escalating, then continuing to rely on half measures and separate instincts will become inefficient. Naruto stared at him. Then he laughed. The QB's eyes narrowed to slits. Don't laugh. Naruto shook his head, still grinning now. I'm sorry, it's just, that's your version of agreeing. I am not agreeing to anything. You kind of are. I said it may become necessary. Right, Naruto said. So we'll work together. The fox bared his teeth. You are unbelievably irritating. And you're still here. That shut him up for a second. Naruto's grin faded after that, leaving something more serious behind. I'm not letting Britannia, Zero, or anyone else decide what happens to the people I care about, he said. If they're getting stronger, then I get stronger too. If the world keeps pushing harder, then I push harder back. He paused. But I'm done acting like I have to carry all of it alone. The QB watched him in silence. Then, with all the dignity of a king giving ground by the smallest possible amount, he huffed and turned his head. Then stop sitting in a chair feeling sorry for yourself. Naruto laughed under his breath. Back in the real world, his eyes opened in the living room. The weight in his chest was still there. But it felt lighter now. Sharper. More manageable. Yeah, he murmured, pushing himself to his feet. There was a lot he needed to rethink. A lot he needed to build. A lot he needed to prepare for. And whether the QB liked admitting it or not, he would not be doing it alone. Naruto took a step toward the door. Then the room blurred. It only lasted a second. The edges of the furniture smeared strangely, the light from the windows doubled for an instant, and the world tilted just enough to make him stop. Naruto blinked hard. The distortion cleared. He frowned and rubbed at his eyes. Inside the seal, the QB had gone still. He said nothing. But his gaze sharpened. Even with his chakra constantly feeding into Naruto's system, even with the healing he was already forcing through the damage, the truth was obvious to him in a way Naruto hadn't yet grasped. The Mangekyo was costing too much. Within the Black Knight's mobile command base, Zero and the other senior members had gathered to hear Ogi's report on the Kyoto Group's evaluation of their performance at Narita. Though Lelouch should have been listening closely, part of his attention was elsewhere, still caught on recent events and the growing complications surrounding both the battlefield and his life at Ashford. Kyoto praised us for the way we used the Gurren Mk2 at Narita, Ogi said, unable to keep a small smile from forming. I'd say that's encouraging. But there was the White Nightmare, Colin reminded everyone from her place on the sofa beside Zero, and Madara's nightmare. Her expression darkened slightly at the memory. She still couldn't help but view Narita as a personal failure, if only because she had been unable to defeat either of them. Don't get worked up over it, Tamaki said cheerfully, waving the concern away. It was basically a tie, right? A tie. He laughed loudly at his own conclusion. Zero was pulled from his own thoughts when Ogi handed him a letter. If you keep doing this, Zero said casually as he took it, people are going to start talking. Ogi stared at him flatly. Very funny. Then he continued more seriously, it's an official letter from Kyoto. They're requesting a meeting as soon as possible. A relieved smile appeared on his face. We've talked before about what their support could mean. If this goes well, it could solve our financial problems. Zero's attention sharpened instantly. Problems. He repeated. There shouldn't be any problems if the budget I laid out is being followed. Tamaki stiffened. Well, Ogi began carefully, there have been some additional expenses. Tamaki threw up his hands. Hey, don't look at me like that. We're not some tiny resistance cell anymore. We're growing. That means spending money. Colin gave him a sly look. You mean like those fancy dinners you've been throwing for the new recruits so you can show off? Tamaki snapped toward her. Oi. I know where you've been taking them, Colin continued, amusement clear in her voice. Tamaki's outrage faltered into surprise. You know about that. Zero let out a quiet sigh before making a decision. Then someone else will manage the treasury. Tamaki shot to his feet. Hold it. I'm the one in charge of the money. That's my job. If you want me to trust you with it, Zero replied evenly, then show me results. Tamaki glared at him. Trust. You're talking about trust. He demanded. How about the guy who hides his face from his own people? Huh, Zero. Ogi stepped forward slightly. Tamaki, wait. Zero's not the problem here, Colin cut in before Ogi could finish. Why does it matter who he is? She looked around at the others, backing her point with conviction. He outplayed Cornelia. He's the reason the Black Knights are even worth Kyoto's attention. He's the reason they're willing to support us in the first place. What more do you need? Tamaki scoffed in frustration, then stormed out of the room without another word. A few minutes later, the senior members of the Black Knights, with the exception of Colin, had gathered outside the mobile command center for a quieter, more private discussion. So, what now? Tamaki asked with a scowl still on his face. Ogi looked uneasy. I don't know. Minami folded his arms. We used to be Naoto's people. Kento nodded. I don't have a problem with Colin being part of this, but... He trailed off, not quite willing to say the rest. Tamaki looked toward Ogi. You were next in line, weren't you? Ogi gave him a tired, wry smile. No one was saying that back at Narita. And you certainly weren't thinking it then either. That was different, Inoue said darkly. At Narita, Zero backed us into a corner. Follow him or die. We're supposed to be his senior officers, Yoshida muttered. And he still keeps too much from us. Ogi looked from one face to another, weighing the mood of the group. Distrust had not fully taken root yet, but it was there now, faint and poisonous. Inside his room in the command center, Lelouch sat with his mask off, looking through a list of names and photographs on his computer screen. Each one belonged to a possible Kyoto contact, narrowed down through what little information he had managed to collect. 12 possibilities, he thought. Now I just have to find out which of them is actually worth betting on. That means seeing them face to face. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Who is it? He called, already reaching for his mask. It's me, Colin answered from the other side. There was a brief pause before she continued, sounding more uncertain than usual. I wanted to say sorry if I spoke out of line earlier. Lelouch glanced toward the door, thoughtful. Colin, he said after a moment, do you want to know who I really am too? On the other side of the door, Colin leaned back against the wall and went quiet. Her mind drifted briefly to CC, to the strange green-haired girl who clearly seemed to know far more than she ever let on. That girl knows, Colin thought. Or at least she knows something. But after a few seconds, she answered. No. There was no hesitation in her voice now. Sorry to bother you, she said quietly before turning and walking away. Lelouch had arranged for the meeting between the Black Knights and Kyoto to take place the following Saturday, and now that the day had arrived, he was making his way out of Ashford Academy grounds. He had already left Nunnally in Sayoko's care, a bag slung over his shoulder, but before he departed, there was one final matter to settle. You were serious. CC's voice drifted out from the side of the path. Lelouch came to a stop and turned his head just enough to see her leaning against a nearby tree, her expression unreadable. You're actually asking me for a favor. Yes, Lelouch answered evenly. I took your point to heart. Whatever Kyoto's true intentions may be, I need their power. CC watched him quietly for a moment. Is that truly what you want? She asked, glancing at him from the corner of her eye. If it lies at the core of your reason for living, then I suppose I can help you. Then do it, Lelouch said, his tone more command than request as he stepped closer. CC, I need you. She stared at him flatly, clearly unimpressed by the way he phrased that, but decided not to argue. She could always get even later by demanding more pizza than usual. Fine, she said at last, closing her eyes for a brief moment before reopening them. By the way, aren't you forgetting something? That date you were supposed to have with Shirley. Lelouch gave her a sidelong look. Spying on me now. CC snorted softly. Hardly. It isn't my fault she chose to ask you in a place where anyone could see it. Lelouch let out a low grunt. I didn't forget. I was about to call her and cancel. I have no idea when I'll be back tonight. As if summoned by the thought, his phone started ringing that very second. He glanced at the screen. Shirley. For the barest instant, Lelouch looked mildly annoyed by the timing before he answered. It's me, he said. Funny timing. I was just about to call you. You see. Lulu. Shirley cut in hesitantly. I know we had plans, but I might be a little late. Sorry. But it should be all right, really. I'll definitely be there. She sounded a little too eager at the end, like she was trying very hard to convince both him and herself. Lelouch closed his eyes briefly. Part of him wanted to let it pass and deal with it later, but he knew better. Even if the Kyoto meeting went smoothly, he would still have to return and report everything to the Black Knights senior members who weren't coming with him. Shirley, he said more gently, I'm sorry, but something came up for me too. I won't be able to make it. There was a short silence. Huh. Her voice came back smaller this time. Lulu, if you don't want to go with me, you can just say so. You don't have to make something up. It's not like that, Lelouch said quickly. This really did come up at the last minute, and it isn't something I can reschedule. What is it? Shirley asked. Lelouch paused, then chose his words carefully. I'd rather not say. Talking about it now might ruin it before it even happens. He let a faint bit of humor touch his voice, though it was mostly an excuse. And Nunnally still isn't feeling completely better, so I'd rather get back as soon as I can after I'm done. Oh, Shirley sounded disappointed, but she did not push. I guess that makes sense, she said quietly. Then, I'll see you later. Tell Nana I said hi. I will. And Shirley, sorry again. Don't worry about it, she replied, trying her best to sound reassuring. Maybe next time. Yes, Lelouch said. Maybe next time. He ended the call. Not far away, in a train station platform crowded with travelers and relief workers, Shirley lowered her phone slowly and looked toward the board showing the departure line to Narita. Beside her, her mother adjusted the strap of her bag and glanced toward the track. Shirley drew in a breath, disappointment and nervous energy mixing in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had her own reason for going today, and even without Lelouch beside her, that part had not changed. A few platforms away, another passenger had just arrived. Mito stepped off the train with a small case in one hand and a Namikaze Corporation identification pass clipped neatly to her jacket. Minato had been tied up in a chain of high-level meetings ever since Narita. Kushina was buried in recovery logistics, and Naruto was stretched thin between the corporation and everything else. That had left Mito to go in person as the Namikaze family representative for one of the corporation's on-site relief inspections. She had not expected the station to be so crowded. She also had not expected to hear a familiar voice. Mito. Shirley blinked, startled, then turned fully toward the red-haired girl. Mito's eyes widened in equal surprise. Shirley. For a second both girls simply stared. What are you doing here? They asked at nearly the same time. Then they both stopped, and despite the tension hanging over Narita and everything connected to it, the awkward symmetry of the moment drew a faint smile from Shirley. Mito recovered first, lifting the case in her hand a little. I'm here on behalf of the Namikaze Corporation. My family's busy, so I'm covering this visit. Shirley nodded quickly. Oh, that makes sense. Mito tilted her head. And you? Shirley shifted a little. I'm just here with my mom. Mito looked mildly curious, but she did not pry. Well, she said softly, I didn't expect to run into anyone from school here. Me neither, Shirley admitted. For a moment, both girls seemed unsure what else to say. Then the station announcement crackled overhead, reminding them that Narita was not just a destination today, but the site of a recent battlefield and the center of an ongoing relief effort. Mito's expression grew more sober. I should probably get going, she said. There's a lot I need to see before I report back. Shirley nodded. Right. Same here. They shared one last surprised look before parting ways into the crowd, each carrying her own thoughts, Shirley with her quiet disappointment and lingering worries, Mito with the weight of responsibility and the faint, unwelcome thought of Suzaku surfacing again as Narita drew closer. Elsewhere, far from the station and hidden beneath a heavy veil of fog in the ruins of a shattered Japanese city, Zero waited for Kyoto's contact to arrive. Only a few seconds later, a black car with tinted windows rolled to a stop in front of him. The rear window lowered just enough to reveal a Japanese driver in a chauffeur's uniform. Bring your command staff, the man said. That is my master's instruction. They are securing the perimeter in case of any unpleasant surprises, Zero replied. I'll summon them in a moment. But before that, part of the mask over his right eye slid away. His Geass flared to life. And from directly behind him, another Zero stepped out of the fog. At the Narita Mountains, Britannian soldiers worked without pause, searching the wreckage for survivors and recovering the dead from the landslide. Sutherlands were used to lift the heaviest debris while smaller teams carried stretchers, sorted belongings, and brought the bodies of the fallen to designated tents. Any severely damaged remains go to Tent 2. Identify all personal effects. Faces that can still be recognized go to Tent 1, mark the recovery time and location clearly. The orders rang out again and again across the temporary recovery zone. Suzaku stood near the edge of the operation, watching in silence as another group carried bodies toward the medical tents. He tried not to listen to the crying families, tried not to look too long at the covered forms being moved past him, but there was only so much he could shut out. His thoughts kept circling back to that strange green-haired girl from Shinjuku, and to the impossible vision of his father. Forget it, he told himself. There's nothing on her in any of the data. Just forget it. He tipped back a bottle of water and poured some over his head, as if cold water alone could wash the memory away. Found enough bodies for one day yet? Lloyd asked lightly as he strolled up behind him, smiling as if they were discussing the weather. Suzaku lowered the bottle. I'd like to stay on recovery duty a while longer, if that's all right. Be my guest. Consider it a kindness from Princess Cornelia, Lloyd replied with an easy shrug. Suzaku's fingers tightened around the bottle. Lloyd, Zero and the Black Knights, what are they trying to achieve? His voice had an edge to it now. How can anyone call what happened here justice? Lloyd gave him a sidelong look. Ah, don't tell me you're about to start on some grand theory about the nature of justice. We're soldiers, remember. Suzaku did not answer. His eyes had shifted past Lloyd, toward the line of visitors being escorted toward the survivor tents. He recognized Shirley immediately. And beside her was Mito. Suzaku blinked, caught off guard. Mito was dressed more formally than usual, a Namikaze Corporation identification badge clipped neatly to her jacket. Of course. She had told the others she was coming to Narita on behalf of the company because Minato, Kushina, and Naruto were all tied up with other matters. Suzaku knew that. Still, seeing her here, in the middle of all this death and ruin, felt different from merely knowing she would come. Cecile. Lloyd called over his shoulder. I finished changing the energy filler, Cecile said from near Lancelot, brushing dust from her hands. Good, good. Suzaku barely heard either of them. I'll be right back, he said, already moving toward the tents. Lloyd watched him go, then looked to Cecile. You checked the units. She nodded. Including the pureblood machines. And her expression turned more serious. It was definitely a radiant surge. Lloyd's smile widened faintly. Rakshata, he said, the name tasting of old rivalry. I didn't expect her to arm our enemies so openly. And their pilot was very good, Cecile added, concern slipping into her voice. If Suzaku has to fight that machine again in his current state. You don't think Lancelot can win? Lloyd asked, sounding almost offended. Cecile gave him a flat look that clearly suggested he was missing the point entirely. Inside one of the main survivor tents, Shirley and Mito followed the silver-haired woman guiding them through the rows of injured. Anna Finette kept close behind Shirley, her anxiety visible in every step. The air inside the tent was tense but far gentler than outside. Fewer bodies. More doctors. More nurses. More hope. This way, Valletta said, glancing at the information she had already confirmed. The surname Finette matches the registry. It took only another few seconds before Shirley spotted him. Dad. Joseph. Shirley and her mother rushed to the bedside where Joseph Finette lay propped up, bruised and exhausted but alive. Relief broke across both women's faces so quickly it was almost painful to watch. Honey, Anna said, clasping his hand tightly, tears already filling her eyes. I was so worried. I'm all right, Joseph said, smiling weakly. A bit broken, but alive. Valletta stepped closer once the family had a moment. Mr. Finette suffered broken legs and several fractures, she said professionally. He was trapped for 2 days, so he is also malnourished and dehydrated. He inhaled a considerable amount of dust, but some of the respiratory equipment provided by the Namikaze Corporation prevented that from becoming much worse. He'll be transferred to a proper hospital later today. Shirley let out a relieved breath. So he's really going to be okay. He'll need therapy and time, Valletta said, but yes. Mito, who had stayed respectfully quiet while the Finettes reunited, softened visibly at that. She had seen too much grief already that day. It was a relief to watch one family get something back. As Valletta stepped away, Suzaku appeared near the entrance of the tent. Shirley. Shirley turned, surprise crossing her face before warming into a smile. Suzaku. Oh, right, of course you'd be here. Then she caught herself and flushed slightly. I mean, I know why you're here. I just didn't expect to actually run into you here. Suzaku smiled, a little tired but genuine. I saw you come in and wanted to make sure everything turned out alright. It did, Shirley said, looking back toward her father with clear relief. Thanks to you. Mito, standing just to Shirley's side, tried very hard not to look too pleased that Suzaku had come over. Anna Finette noticed him properly then and studied him for a moment, uncertain at first. Joseph, however, stared a second longer and recognition hit. You're the one, he said. The nightmare pilot. You're the one who pulled me out. Anna and Shirley both turned sharply toward him. Suzaku looked a little embarrassed. I just happened to find you. No, Joseph said with conviction. You saved my life. Anna bowed her head at once. Then thank you. Truly. Shirley was even less restrained. She threw her arms around Suzaku in a tight, grateful hug. Thank you, Suzaku. Really. Suzaku stiffened in surprise, then awkwardly patted her back. You don't need to thank me. I was only doing my job. That doesn't matter, Shirley insisted as she pulled back. You still saved him. Only then did Shirley seem to remember something else. Her eyes brightened, then shifted sideways toward Mito. Mito noticed immediately and narrowed her eyes. Why are you looking at me like that? Shirley's smile turned just a little mischievous. Well, she began, glancing between the two of them, Lelouch cancelled on me at the last minute, and I still have those tickets to the concert sponsored by the Namikaze Corporation tonight. Suzaku blinked. The concert. Right, Shirley said quickly. And before you say no, don't even try it. You've been here for days, Suzaku. You need a break. I should stay and help a little longer, Suzaku replied automatically. Nope, Shirley said at once. Then she turned dramatically toward Mito and pointed at her like she had just solved everything. Then take Mito. There was a beat of stunned silence. Suzaku stared. Mito stared. Anna Finette blinked in open curiosity, while Joseph's expression became instantly interested. Me. Mito said, her face going red. Why would I go with him? It's not like I was waiting for something like that or anything. Shirley crossed her arms. You already know why I'm here, and I know why you're here. So don't even start. Her grin widened. Besides, I can't think of anyone better to drag him away from all this for one night. Suzaku looked between the two girls, clearly trying to process what had just happened. I didn't even ask. Well, you should, Shirley said brightly. Mito folded her arms and turned her head away, cheeks still pink. You don't have to ask, she muttered. I'll go. Suzaku stared at her. You will. Mito huffed, still refusing to look directly at him. Don't misunderstand. I'm only agreeing because Shirley's right, you need a break. That's all. Shirley beamed like she had just won something. There. Settled. Mito, Suzaku said, still sounding a little stunned, are you sure? Mito finally looked at him, trying very hard to seem composed and failing just enough to be obvious. Yes, she said, quieter this time. I'm sure. Joseph Finette looked between the two teenagers and gave a thoughtful hum. Anna, meanwhile, smiled faintly despite herself. Shirley, utterly pleased with her own work, clasped her hands together. Great. Then it's decided. Suzaku, you're going. Mito, you're making sure he actually does. Mito's blush deepened. Shirley. But Shirley only laughed. For the first time all day, Suzaku felt a little of the weight on his shoulders ease, just a little as he looked at Mito and saw that, despite the chaos around them, she had really agreed without him even having to ask. For the past hour, ever since they'd met the chauffeur sent by the Kyoto group, Zero and the three Black Knights with him, Colin, Ogi, and Tamaki had been driven farther and farther into what felt like the middle of nowhere. Zero hadn't said a word the whole ride. The others had not handled the silence nearly as well. This is ridiculous, Tamaki grumbled at last, glaring at the curtained windows as if sheer irritation might make them transparent. How long is this supposed to take? Across from him, Colin sat with her arms folded, one finger tapping against her sleeve. Can you calm down? She snapped. You're making it worse. Oh, sorry, Tamaki shot back. Next time I'll be more relaxed while we're getting hauled off to some secret underground death pit. Ogi rubbed at his temple. That's enough, both of you. Before either of them could answer, the car stopped. For one brief second, everything went still. Then the floor shifted beneath them. Tamaki jerked upright. What the hell? Colin's eyes widened slightly. We're moving. Ogi looked toward the windows. Up. The car continued rising for several more seconds before finally coming to a smooth stop. The chauffeur stepped out first, then opened the door for them. My apologies for the inconvenience, he said politely. My master is waiting. Zero stepped out first. The others followed close behind. The moment they saw where they were, 3 out of the 4 of them moved straight toward the wide glass panels lining the room. Far below stretched a vast sea of forest. Above them was open sky. And in the hazy distance, barely visible, sat a Britannian settlement. Ogi stared. This is, his voice dropped. The Fuji mines. That's impossible, Tamaki said, leaning far too close to the glass. There's no way we're actually here. Colin looked out over the horizon, stunned despite herself. It has to be Mount Fuji, she said quietly. There's nowhere else this could be. Tamaki's gaze dropped toward the structure beneath them. So all that Sakuradite is right under us. His expression twisted. The treasure that started this whole damn war. Then, belatedly, panic caught up with him. You know what they do to intruders here, right? He said, turning back toward the others. They execute them. Ogi, however, was too caught off guard to match his panic. The Kyoto group can reach all the way into a place like this, he said quietly. That kind of influence. It is not influence, an aged voice said from the darkness ahead. It is disgrace. The windows behind them blacked out all at once, swallowing the view and plunging the room into dimmer light. The only illumination left came from a few low lamps. Ahead of them, half hidden behind hanging blinds, sat an elderly man in a kimono. Only the lower half of his body was clearly visible. He rested both hands on a cane. Mount Fuji, he continued, was once sacred. A place of beauty, of stillness, of clear water. His voice turned colder. Now it has been gutted for the empire's greed. Violated. Hollowed out. It reflects what has become of Japan, and that disgusts me. The room went silent. Then the old man lifted his cane and pointed it straight at Zero. I regret not showing my own face, he said. But then, yours remains hidden as well. His tone sharpened. That, I cannot allow. If I am to place trust in you, I must know who you are. Remove your mask. As if that were a signal, 4 beret emerged from the shadows around them and leveled their weapons directly at Zero. Colin moved instantly, stepping in front of him with her arms spread. Wait, she said. Zero gave us power. Victories. A reason to fight back. That should be enough. Silence, the old man snapped. Then he shifted his attention. Which one of you is Ogi? Ogi hesitated, then stepped forward. I am. You will remove Zero's mask. Colin spun toward him. Ogi. But Ogi didn't look at her. The tension in the room, the distrust on both sides, the weight of what Kyoto was being asked to gamble on, it all pressed down on him at once. He looked at Zero. I'm sorry, he said quietly. But we need a reason to trust you too. Then he reached out and pulled off the mask. For one stunned second, nobody said anything. Long strands of light green hair spilled free. Standing where Zero had been was CC, looking as calm and bored as ever. Tamaki was the first one to break. Huh, a woman. Ogi, Colin said sharply, staring. That's not Zero. She pointed at CC. I've seen her before. She was with Zero. And with Madara after Narita. The old man shifted slightly behind the blinds. Girl, he said, is that true? It is, CC. Answered flatly. The old man studied her. So, he said at last, you are not Japanese. No. Then CC. Smiled faintly, almost mockingly. Taiza Kirihara. The 2 men nearest Kirihara stiffened. Anyone who can identify him, one began, reaching for his weapon, must die. Especially if she isn't Japanese, the other added. Hey, wait a second. Tamaki yelped, taking a step back. I'm not part of this. Before anyone else could move, one of the beret nearest Kirihara suddenly turned on the others. Its Harkins lashed out, knocking 2 machines aside and sending their rifles clattering away. In the next instant, the blade on its left arm extended and disarmed the last one before pivoting toward Kirihara himself. The room locked up in shock. Then the cockpit opened. Zero stepped out. You are soft, he said coolly, dropping from the machine with a remote detonator in his hand. Your methods are outdated. Your assumptions are obvious. That is why you will never defeat Britannia. When did he? One of Kirihara's guards gasped. The other saw the detonator and barked at the Barai pilots, don't move. He can trigger the weapons remotely. Zero ignored them completely. He walked toward Kirihara with measured steps. Taiza Kirihara, he said. Founder of Kirihara Industry. Master of Sakurudite mining. A man who supported the Kururugi administration before the war. One of the 6 houses of Kyoto. Publicly, a collaborator. Privately, a patron of resistance. He stopped directly in front of him. A double agent, Zero said. How theatrical. Watch your tongue, swine. One of the guards shouted. Silence, Kirihara said. The room obeyed instantly. He looked at Zero for a long moment. If you are not Japanese, he asked, then why do you fight for Japan? What is it that you want? The destruction of Britannia. The answer came without hesitation. Kirihara's expression shifted ever so slightly. And you believe you can achieve that? I can, Zero said. Because I have to. Then he reached up and removed his mask. Kirihara's eyes widened at once. Recognition flashed across his face. You. It has been a long time, Lord Kirihara, Lelouch said. The old man stared at him. 8 years, Kirihara murmured. 8 years since your family cast you into this country and called it peace. Yes, Lelouch replied quietly. And I have not forgotten the kindness you showed us then. Kirihara kept staring at him. Then he asked, if I had not come personally, were you prepared to take my representative hostage? No, Lelouch said simply. I came here to ask for your help. Nothing more. For a moment, Kirihara said nothing. Then he laughed. The flower planted 8 years ago has finally bloomed. Tamaki craned his neck uselessly. I still can't see him. Ogi, Kirihara said. Yes. This man is a true enemy of Britannia. His face must remain hidden. Follow him, and Kyoto will support you, with intelligence, strategy, and everything else within our reach. Ogi only needed a second for the meaning of that to settle in. We're grateful. I am grateful as well, Lelouch said, replacing the mask. Kirihara's smile lingered. So you have chosen the path of blood. Lelouch turned slightly, the mask settling back into place. If that is my path, he said evenly, then yes. Kirihara chuckled softly, though the amusement faded into something more thoughtful. Then he asked, tell me one thing, Zero. Lelouch paused. Kirihara leaned on his cane. If your struggle one day forces you into conflict with Naruto Namikaze, would you truly go through with it? The room changed at once. Colin's eyes sharpened. Ogi looked caught off guard. Even Tamaki stopped fidgeting. Lelouch stood very still. Then he answered. I hope, he said quietly, that it never comes to that. Kirihara watched him for several long seconds. Then he nodded. In Madara? He asked after a pause. There are old stories in Japanese folklore of figures who appear at the turning of an age, half omen, half guardian, shadows at the edge of war. His mouth curved faintly. A pity, really. His nightmare carries the name of a Shinto god, and yet the man himself remains a mystery. Zero said nothing at first. Very little is known. Despite the rumors, Madara is not allied with the Black Knights. We have crossed paths. Nothing more. Kirihara gave a low, unreadable hum. That is unfortunate, he said. A man like you, and a figure like Madara, together, you might have become something even Britannia could not withstand. Zero did not answer. He only adjusted his mask and stepped back toward the others. Hours later, as the sun was beginning to set over the Tokyo settlement, Suzaku stood just outside the venue where the Namikaze Corporation-sponsored concert was being held. He had only just arrived and was scanning the crowd when he spotted the person he was looking for. Mito had changed after returning from Narita, trading the more formal clothes she had worn while representing the Namikaze Corporation for something softer and better suited for the evening. Even so, she still carried herself with the same composure she always tried to maintain, though the moment she spotted Suzaku, some of that composure wavered. Suzaku, she greeted, trying to sound calmer than she felt. Suzaku smiled, relieved he had found her so quickly. Mito. Sorry if I kept you waiting. HMPH. It's not like I was worried, Mito said at once, folding her arms. Then, after a beat, she added more quietly, you made it. I said I would. Mito looked away for a second, her expression softening. Right. For a moment the two of them simply stood there, the noise of the crowd swirling around them. Narita still hung between them in unspoken ways, too much death, too much exhaustion, too much left unsaid, but neither of them wanted to start the evening with that. So, Suzaku said, glancing toward the brightly lit entrance. Shall we go in? Mito nodded, then quickly caught herself and made it look more casual than eager. Fine. But don't think this means anything strange. I'm only here because Shirley pushed the tickets on me, and because you obviously need the break. Suzaku laughed softly. Right. Of course. That only made Mito blush and look away again. The two of them headed inside together. Back at the Lamperouge residence, Lelouch arrived home after dark, damp from the light rain that had started while he was finishing his meeting with the Black Knights. For the last half hour, he had been briefing the senior members on the details of Kyoto's offer and what it would mean for the future of the organization. Things are finally moving forward, he thought as he dried his hair with a towel. Now the Black Knights can start operating on the scale I originally intended. He was about to head upstairs when he heard voices coming from the living room. Curious, he stepped in to find Nunnally and Sayoko gathered around the television. Lelouch, is that you? Nunnally asked. Yeah, he replied, giving Sayoko a nod. Why are you still awake? Nunnally wanted to watch the concert broadcast, Sayoko explained. It's the one sponsored by Naruto's company, Nunnally added brightly. Lelouch blinked, then gave a faint smile. I forgot how much you like their music. Nunnally blushed a little. They're very good. He was about to tease her about asking Naruto for an autograph someday when Naruto's voice suddenly boomed from the television speakers. Inside the venue, the atmosphere was electric. Lights swept over a packed crowd, music thundered through the hall, and the giant screen above the stage flashed with vivid colors and stylized effects. Naruto stood at the front beneath the lights, microphone in hand, dressed in one of his performance jackets with black and orange accents. He wasn't part of the band tonight, but he was very much acting as the face of the event, warming up the audience, introducing acts, and keeping the energy high. Everybody having a good time tonight? Naruto shouted, grinning as the crowd roared back at him. He laughed. That's what I like to hear. And before we keep going, I just want to say, seriously, thanks for coming tonight. Whether you're here because you love the music, because the Namikaze Corporation sponsored the whole thing and you got curious, or because somebody dragged you here for a good time, I'm glad you're all here. More cheers answered him. Then Naruto glanced out across the audience. And found Mito. And Suzaku. His grin faltered for half a second. One eye twitched. That was, absolutely not the pair he had expected to see together under those seats tonight. But Naruto was nothing if not adaptable. The fox-like grin snapped right back into place. Well, he said, clearly deciding to commit to chaos anyway, looks like I've got some special guests in the audience tonight. Mito immediately stiffened in her seat. Suzaku blinked, confused. A spotlight slammed down over the two of them. The crowd reacted instantly, turning to look, cheering before they even knew why. Mito's face went bright red. Suzaku, she hissed under her breath, what did he just do? I don't know. Suzaku whispered back, equally caught off guard. On stage, Naruto placed a hand dramatically over his chest. Don't they make the cutest couple you've ever seen? The audience, already eager for this kind of nonsense, cheered their agreement. Mito looked like she wanted the ground to open up and swallow her. Suzaku looked 1 second away from short-circuiting. Naruto, still visibly working through the fact that this was not at all the setup he had planned, decided to continue as if nothing was wrong. Well then, he declared, gesturing grandly toward the band, this next song goes out to them. The music kicked in. It was upbeat, romantic, entirely too on the nose. Mito made a small strangled noise and covered part of her face with one hand. Suzaku, red from the ears down, gave a helpless laugh. The giant screen behind the stage zoomed in on them, making escape impossible. At the hospital, Shirley sat with her parents beside Joseph Finette's bed, all three of them watching the same concert broadcast on the small television mounted in the room. Shirley had originally planned to be there with Lelouch. She had planned everything. And then he had cancelled. So she had wound up staying with her parents instead, telling herself it was the right thing to do. It was. That did not mean she was thrilled when the giant screen suddenly cut to Mito and Suzaku sitting together under a spotlight while Naruto grinned like a menace from the stage. Shirley's eyes widened. Oh no. Then her expression sharpened in outrage. That idiot. Anna blinked. Naruto. Yes, Naruto. Shirley said, pointing at the screen as if she could accuse him directly through it. He planned this. He totally planned something like this. Joseph, propped up in bed and looking much better than he had at Narita, leaned forward with interest. Planned what? Shirley threw her hands up. That spotlight stunt. He was supposed to do something embarrassing like that to me and Lelouch. The realization hit her full force as she said it out loud. Her face flushed. Then she got even angrier. He repurposed it. He just changed targets because Lulu didn't show up. Anna covered her mouth, half shocked and half amused. Joseph barked out a laugh. That boy's got nerve. Shirley slumped back in her chair, muttering furiously. I'm going to kill him. At Ashford, Lelouch stared at the television in complete silence for 2 seconds. Then his eyes narrowed. That idiot, he muttered. Nunnally tilted her head. Brother. Lelouch kept his gaze on the screen as Naruto, very obviously improvising, continued hyping up Mito and Suzaku for the crowd. He understood it instantly. Naruto had planned this for him and Shirley. A spotlight. A romantic song. A public shove into something embarrassing and obvious. It was exactly the kind of ridiculous stunt his old childhood friend would have thought was funny. Only now, instead of Lelouch and Shirley, Naruto had found Mito and Suzaku and simply decided to keep going. Lelouch closed his eyes for a moment and let out a long breath. Unbelievable. Then, because he was wet, tired, and in no mood to be charitable, he mentally cursed Naruto with more venom than the situation probably deserved. Nunnally, hearing none of that internal commentary, simply asked, what happened? Lelouch opened his eyes again and forced his expression back under control. Nothing, he said smoothly. Naruto is just being Naruto. Back at the Namikaze household, Minato and Kushina had only just managed to settle in for the evening after a long day of meetings, relief coordination, and recovery logistics. They had turned on the broadcast hoping to catch a little of the concert, and maybe see how Naruto was handling the event. What they got instead was a giant close-up of Mito and Suzaku under a spotlight, both of them blushing furiously while Naruto announced them to the entire venue. There was a full second of silence. Then Kushina's eyes widened. Oh my god. Minato blinked, then leaned forward slightly. Is that? Yes, that is definitely Mito and Suzaku, Kushina said. On stage, Naruto's grin got bigger though internally he was screaming. Kushina immediately pointed at the television. I swear, it is about time. Minato looked at her in surprise. You're in favor of this. Kushina turned to him with a look that said obviously. Have you seen the way they act around each other? Minato opened his mouth, closed it, then looked back at the screen where Mito was clearly trying to pretend she was not dying of embarrassment. Fair point. Kushina folded her arms, looking deeply pleased and deeply offended at the same time. Mito and Suzaku. Good. Fine. Wonderful. It was about time somebody did something. Then her expression darkened. But I am still going to wring Naruto's neck. Minato laughed despite himself. That sounds about right. On screen, the crowd had started chanting. Kiss. 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 Kushina inhaled sharply. Oh, he has got nerve. Minato, to his credit, looked far less upset now than amused. At least he's forcing the issue. Kushina pointed at him. Do not encourage this. I didn't say I approved of the method. You smiled. I did not. You absolutely did. Inside the concert hall, Mito had gone from embarrassed to openly panicked. Suzaku, she whispered, not taking her eyes off the stage, make it stop. I don't know how, Suzaku whispered back. Naruto leaned into the microphone, laughing. Come on, don't be shy. The audience got louder. Kiss. 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 Mito made a noise of disbelief. I hate him. Suzaku swallowed hard. Then he looked at Mito. Really looked at her. At the way she was blushing. At the way she was trying so hard to stay composed and failing just enough to be endearing. At the fact that for all her flustered complaints, she had still come here with him. That decided it. Suzaku leaned in. Mito's eyes widened. And then he kissed her. Not on the cheek. Not some quick, awkward gesture to pacify the crowd. A real kiss. The audience erupted. On stage, Naruto visibly froze for a fraction of a second before breaking into a smile, however internally he was planning 10 different ways to kill Suzaku. At the hospital, Shirley shot to her feet. He actually did it. Joseph laughed so hard he had to stop and catch his breath. Anna looked equally shocked and charmed. At Ashford, Lelouch actually went still, then stared at the screen with narrowed eyes as if Naruto himself had somehow personally offended him through the broadcast. At the Namikaze household, Kushina slapped a hand over her mouth. Minato's eyes widened. Then both of them smiled. When Suzaku finally pulled back, he was blushing nearly as hard as Mito. Mito looked completely stunned. For one heartbeat, 2, 3, she seemed incapable of forming words. Then her hands bunched in the front of Suzaku's shirt. Suzaku tensed slightly, looking almost ready for her to slap him. Instead, still bright red and glaring in a way that clearly hid more than it revealed, Mito hissed, "You are impossible." But she didn't let go. And on stage, Naruto, now fully committed to the disaster he had unleashed, brought the microphone back up with a grin so wide it should have been illegal. "Well," he said, laughing, "I think they handled that better than I could have." The crowd roared again. And even with all the embarrassment, all the chaos, and all the lectures waiting later, Minato and Kushina watching proudly from home, Shirley yelling at the screen from the hospital, Lelouch cursing his old childhood friend from Ashford, Mito's heart was pounding for reasons she could no longer deny.